Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Crucible podcast dedicated for debates, namely Bloodsport. My name is Pedro. The internet has deemed me the black hammer on top. I'm just a regular guy. And this is my co-host, Andrew Wilson. Say what's up, Andrew.
How's it going, everybody? Pedro, you think your mic's fucked up again?
Yeah.
Sounds underwater again. I don't know what's the deal, man. You talk backstage and it's fine. The second you come out, it's all fucked up every single time.
There's always something here going on, ladies and gentlemen. Let me.
Okay, sounds good now.
What? Are you serious?
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. Very well. All right. Well, tonight, guys, we have an interview and then a debate going on. We have seen him debate, actually, Andrew, before, and he's done a pretty good job. He's held his own, so he's tested. This is the Mouthy Infidel. Say what's up, Mouthy.
Hey, what's up?
How's life treating you, man? What have you been up to?
I'm doing all right. Just hanging out, reading.
Oh, what are you reading?
Right now I'm reading a book called Reasons and Persons by Derek Parfit. It's a philosophy thing.
High IQ. Okay.
So Mouthy, how did you get into debating?
Well, I've kind of always had an interest in politics and talking about politics from the time I was pretty young. And then I guess the debating thing just sort of happened naturally. I was sort of talking to people, writing like political essays and going back and forth with people on platforms like Instagram and so on. And then I guess I just started debating people. And then I started a YouTube channel for it. And that's pretty much it.
How long ago did you start that YouTube channel?
It's been, I want to say, a few years since I first started the channel. A lot of my first videos are privated or unlisted now because I don't like some of my older videos. But yeah, it's been like I think at least 3 years since I first started it.
You don't want to keep them up to like show people your progression?
I've thought about it, but I don't know. Some of the content of my older videos is not something I'm particularly proud of.
Did you lose in one of these debates? Be honest. Tell the truth.
No, I only started. I don't think I have any debates that are unlisted. I think it's just like, sort of video essay type stuff, video response type stuff. I actually did have a debate with
your boy threw you under the bus, dude. Your boy threw you under the bus.
You got me. Yeah, I actually do have a debate that's unlisted that I did against Eric Stryker, and I think I did well. But the reason I unlisted it is just because I was, as Omni pointed out, a raging communist with a lot of views that I don't currently hold. That I was espousing in that debate.
Like.
Well, I was like more, I was like a hardcore, like left comm, like we need revolution to abolish capitalism and any reform is, just going to set us back, like that kind of thing. I was also like sort of class reductionist-esque. They're never like socially reactionary, but.
So that was the end you were arguing is basically communism light.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Did you win
against Eric Stryker?
Yeah,
I think so.
You think so?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did.
Right. But
how long ago did you take him on anyway?
I think that was about 2 years ago. Yeah, I think it's about 2 years ago at this point.
That you went up against Eric?
Yeah.
Yeah. So everybody keeps asking in the comments how old you are. You don't have to answer that.
Oh, I'm 18.
18. Fuck. Fucking imagine this kid at 25, man.
It's
You
gonna
know?
be well. He'll be Christian by then. He's
That's
come
right.
here tonight.
We'll,
to learn about his Lord and Savior,
turn him
Jesus
out.
Christ.
So what would you say your philosophy is now, Mouthy?
Well, my philosophy, I'm kind of on the fence when it comes to morality, I guess. For a long time I've been pretty ardent, like moral anti-realist, kind of just arguing that I have certain preferences that I want to see realized, and I think I can persuade most people to agree with how I see things. I've been becoming like more sympathetic to sort of like moral realist views from reading like Derek Parfit. But I'm not sure. I have like a set of political prescriptions that I have that I try to argue for. But yeah, when it comes to like the more foundational philosophy stuff, I'm still trying to work that out, I guess.
So this is a good question, right? What the fuck is an anti-moral realist? LOL.
Oh, yeah. Well, the moral realism debate is just kind of about whether or not morality is objective. So a moral realist is going to say that like a moral statement like you ought not kill is something that's objectively true, and it's, you know, true independently of how anybody feels about it. Whereas a moral anti-realist is going to say that there are no really objective moral truths. There are just kind of people have different desires and preferences that they try to actualize, and that's pretty much it.
You fall somewhere in between?
I'm somewhere towards the agnostic view currently, I would say.
But can you answer directly? Do you believe in objective truth?
You got to put your head up to that mic, Pedro. We'll turn it up.
Do you believe in objective truth?
Do I believe in objective truth? Well, I think that there are certain like maybe, I guess, like to get really technical, like epistemic like axioms that we all accept, you know, things like you know, there can't be contradictions, you know, like law of non-contradiction, law of identity, etc. And I think that, you know, we can accept those axioms as a sort of a pragmatic thing and just say, hey, we can't really deny these axioms because it's not even conceivable that we could deny them. And so we can sort of move on from there. I guess it's conceivable that all of our basic axioms are just wrong. You know, like it could be possible that contradictions exist in the universe and we just can't perceive them. It could be true that we're all actually just brains in vats and the external world isn't even real. I guess all of these things are possible. So I would never say that I have 100% certainty in any of the things that I think are true. But I also think that those are kind of just like, you know, psychological games that we can play, but they're not really super interesting to me to think about those kinds of things.
Gotcha. So you watched a new Matrix 4 trailer coming out and said that this could actually this could be real. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Exactly.
So what are your goals with your debates, Mouthy?
I think my goal is mostly just to try and construct a position that I think is coherent and defensible, and then see if I can defend it against other people. And if I can, then that's cool. And if I can't, then that's cool. And I can, you know, sort of revise what I think and see if I can come up with better arguments for a position that I hold, or just drop the position altogether. I guess my ultimate aim is just to engage in a process where I'm trying to make my positions as strong as possible, such that I can stand up to scrutiny as well as possible.
So have you had your mind changed on anything?
I've had my mind changed throughout the course of my channel. Like I used to be a lot more far left, like, you know, pro-revolution, pro-communism, etc. As I've started to take more seriously the idea that what we should be doing is crafting society based on what we have empirical evidence for, I've kind of become more sympathetic to a more sort of pragmatic politics, where I'm advocating things that I'm actually confident in, rather than things that sort of sound nice and in sort of abstract utopia type fantasy land. So yeah, I've certainly shifted not as radically far left over the course of my channel. I've shifted on some philosophical things, but I think on most of my core sort of values, I don't think I've ever. I think I've always been pretty solidly like on the left, both socially and economically, I would say.
Apparently, you've already won this debate, by the way.
Wow.
You can see it's been
Effortless.
It's been called for you already, man. I don't even feel like we really got into it, but
Yeah.
go ahead, Pedro.
So what leans you towards the agnostic?
Yeah, well, there are sort of considerations on both sides, like on the sort of anti-realist side. I am somewhat compelled by arguments from, like, I guess what you would call like ontological parsimony, where in order to postulate like objective moral truths, you would have to postulate the existence of like a kind of entity that's just sort of unlike everything else that we can empirically observe in the natural world. Those kinds of arguments. And then on the realist side, particularly an argument from Parfit that I found compelling, appeals to a case that he calls like Future Tuesday indifference, where the idea is if there are no reasons for acting that are independent of our desires, then if somebody desired to undergo like extreme agony on a future Tuesday as opposed to a slight pain on a future Wednesday, just because he arbitrarily was indifferent towards his suffering on future Tuesdays, then the anti-realist would have to say that he's being perfectly rational and he doesn't have any reason to act in a different way because that's what he desires. And so I think those sorts of thought experiments do push me in the direction of accepting that maybe there are certain reasons that we have for acting in certain ways that exist sort of independently of our desires.
Gotcha. So you kind of would reject the notion of free will.
Can you turn your mic up for me a little bit, Pedro?
Yeah.
Sorry. We had it backstage. It sounded perfect. Now it sounds too quiet.
Yeah, we were crystal earlier.
Yeah, a little bit more if you can even.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
what do you mean it would be a good debate? He's already won the debate. Didn't you read the comments base? He's already won it. Go ahead, Pedro.
So you would actually like sounds like you would reject the notion of free will, right?
Yeah, I think I would reject the notion of free will in the sort of, certainly in the sort of libertarian free will sense of, if there was a view that I was sympathetic to, I mean, I am sympathetic to the determinist view, which is basically just everything we do is just determined by prior causes, etc., and we don't really exert any conscious control over our own behavior or sort of internal thoughts. There is a view called compatibilism, which basically just concedes that premise, but then says that we can still talk about free will and have the kind of free will that we consider like morally relevant, even if determinism is true. And I don't have a very strong position on that, I guess. I haven't looked into it that much.
You're solid. And then let's lighten it up a bit. Favorite YouTuber? Go.
Favorite YouTuber?
Just say BPF. He's right here. It's not that bad.
Yeah. I do like. I do like watching Destiny pretty often. I like a lot of philosophy YouTubers. Like I watch Kane B a lot. He does interesting like philosophy lectures. He's a PhD student. I like, I don't know. I do like ContraPoints. ContraPoints is pretty cool. I like Gregory Sadler. He does interesting philosophy talks as well. But yeah, actually, I don't think I watch that much YouTube.
Okay.
Who's your least favorite?
My least favorite, definitely this guy called Deity Defeater, I would say. That guy is a complete raving lunatic.
This asshole Deity Defeater, he contacts me one night, and he's like, I don't know if I can do his voice, but it sounds something like, "Hey guys, how it go?" It's something like that, right?
Oh my gosh. Oh wait, this is Omni, right?
Yeah, I'm just messing around, man. Omni's he's a good kid, and he's a smart kid, and he's a good debater. I just like to bust his balls, but he sounds something like that. He calls himself an impressionist, but I feel like I got him nailed just a little bit better.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. Where did you run into him anyway?
I ran into him in Ask Yourself server, or maybe it was Avi's server. It was one of the two. Mouthy was there, and I guess we talked briefly over voice chat about like ethics, and then he messaged me, and then we started talking more frequently.
Gotcha. Are you guys going to do any team ups, you think?
Yeah, we did one on
Mio.
Politically Provoked. Yeah, against Mio.
Yeah, I went back. So Omni told me about that, so I went back and watched it. Why don't you elucidate us on what happened there?
Well, first of all, he unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, Mio knows everything, so he lost
does.
that one.
But when you have a 145 IQ, I mean, yeah, who's gonna mess with you at that point? You know what I mean, bro?
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead. What happened, Mouthy?
Yeah, I mean, I just I sort of like the night before. Brittany told me that they were doing another one and that Mio was going to be on. And so I was like, oh, okay. I guess I should go on and argue with him about this, I guess, argument that he's come up with about like little Timmy or whatever. And so I formulated like a quick critique. I did like a few hours of research, wrote up some notes, and then I went on the Politically Provoked pop-in show, and I basically ran my critique, which is basically just that Mio's whole concern is that if we have more diversity, it'll lead to all this racial animus against white people, and so we'll have these white children in the future who are just being harassed by their, Black and Hispanic classmates or whatever as they're being taught about slavery, and that because white people are now the minority, they'll be disempowered and they'll be bullied, etc. And my basic critique is that it seems like what's at the core of the little Timmy concern is this idea of racial animus and conflict between races and social cohesion. And it just happens to be the case that if you actually look at the empirical evidence, it's overwhelmingly clear that the best way to address that racial animus and to create better relations between the races is to engage in policies that lower economic inequality between races, lower social inequality between races, and those would be the kinds of policies that I would advocate for. What Mio advocates for, on the other hand, is the exact opposite of what we would want to be doing. Because if we're trying to decrease racial animus, and his solution is to, engage in white nationalist rhetoric and try and, kick all of the brown people out, then that's just going to be directly not conducive to what we're trying to achieve if we're trying to build a better life for little Timmy.
On a scale of 1 to 100,000, where would you put the little Timmy argument?
I would put it probably like a 5, maybe.
Okay.
I think it's extremely weak.
So, I mean, you had a lot of wiggle room there, man, and you still put it down at a 5. Holy, I never cared for the argument, as you might know, but so when you guys duke it out with him, did you manage to end it on good terms?
I'm not sure. I know that Wurzleroo joined at some point, and he was extremely angry, as was his girlfriend. I mean, they were just like screaming for a really long time, not really engaging with any of the critiques. I don't feel like anybody really engaged with the critique, or Omni's critique, which was Omni made his own argument called the Little Juan argument, where he's basically saying
that from my little Jamal argument.
Yeah.
But anyway, go ahead.
Copyright. Yeah.
These names, man.
These names.
Jamal. Okay, so we know what Jamal is.
Yeah, but I mean, Omni's basic critique was just like, sure, in the future, if white people are the minority, there might be some white children being bullied. Right now, when Hispanics are the minority, there are some there are some Hispanics that are being bullied since they're the minority, and we have no real reason to believe that the total amount of little Timmys who will be bullied once white people become the minority will be greater than the overall amount of little Juans who are being bullied while white people are the minority. And I think there's something to that, and I think that sort of touches on an issue with the little Timmy argument, which is just like the insane amount of nativism that you'd have to already buy into in order to find this compelling. I mean, to think that like when we're talking about like immigrants coming over who like if they're left in their home country, they might starve or live under political or economic oppression. And you find it compelling that like we should reject these people because there's a non-zero chance that some white child will be taught about slavery in class or something. I mean, it just seems like an extremely silly and nativist line to take. Yeah, I mean, I think we ended it on good terms, I guess, to answer the question. I don't think anybody's really super angry at anyone else or anything like that.
Well, now you've tangled up with Wurzel before in a mutual debate. I think it was you and Destiny, and then Wurzel Root, and he had a fairly quiet partner, if I remember correctly.
Right. Yeah.
Kind of turned into a bit of a 2-on-1. But I thought he handled himself pretty well in that debate. What did you think?
I don't remember that well, that debate. I mean, I think he definitely did better than his partners, who I guess just weren't talking much.
Well, it's funny. One of his partners, I think, was named like John Talks.
Yeah.
He was sitting in the comments the whole time going, is John Talks ever going to start talking?
Yeah.
But anyway, moving on from the wondrous 5 out of 100,000 little Timmy argument, there is a lot of pushback, though. And the pushback from the ethno-nationalists, and I think that there's a point here that maybe you could agree with, is the social cohesion aspect that happens when you have mass immigration. Do you think that there's any merit to that?
Yeah, so from the literature that I've engaged with, there is some merit to the idea that diversity can often decrease social cohesion. The two caveats that I would add is that on the one hand, the effect size is way smaller than what people want to portray it as. So like, I think even like the Robert Putnam study, Robert Putnam study that everybody likes to mention about diversity and social cohesion, even his study found an effect size that like variance in diversity can only account for like less than 1% of the overall variance in social cohesion. So the impact seems to be way more minor than people tend to think it is. And additionally, to the extent that diversity does have a negative impact on social cohesion, it seems like that impact goes away once you control for things like residential segregation, economic inequality between the races, etc. And so, that's why in the United States, race relations were increasing pretty rapidly when Black wealth was growing in, say, the 1995 to 2005 time period. And then after the economy collapsed and Black wealth catered under Obama because of the 2008 collapse and so on, racial tensions took a sharp nosedive yet again. And then they took another nosedive with this sort of racially charged rhetoric of people like Donald Trump in 2016. And so it just seems clear to me that to the extent that diversity does have some minor impact on social cohesion, this is not a product of diversity per se, but rather a product of like inequality between races and so on. And so to the extent that we're concerned with decreasing racial animus, increasing social cohesion, we should be looking to enact policies that, make the races more equal rather than less, which was my basic critique of Mio's argument.
Gotcha. John Hoffman asked, why do only white countries have significant immigration?
I don't know if that's true. I haven't looked at the data on that, but either way, I'm not really sure why that would be the case, if that was the case.
And from Alexius, real quick, Pedro, and then I'll kick it right over to you. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Asia alone has over 4 billion people. It's essentially an endless pool of potential immigrants. Would you agree or disagree that that's true?
Potential immigrants, maybe. I'm not sure. Like, I guess if all of Asia decided to come over here, I mean, it would be a lot of people for sure. I mean, I'd never advocate for like complete open borders, let in like, all of the rest of the population if everyone wanted to come in. I think that we can handle I think we can handle more immigration than we're currently taking in. I support accepting more immigration, et cetera. But yeah, I mean, if the concern is like, what if all of Asia decided to try and infiltrate America, I would say that would probably be bad, especially if it happened all at once. It seemed like it'd be a pretty big economic shock to add that many to our population that quickly.
Go ahead, Pedro. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Do you think you're focusing a lot on social programs? Do you think at all culture is a big factor in the whole racial tension thing, or do you have maybe a second to go in on what culture is and if it even does apply to the situation?
Well, I think that to the extent that culture in and of itself is going to have a massive negative impact, I don't think culture in itself is that big of a deal, especially because, in the United States, I'm sure we've all heard this argument before, but there already is a pretty massive divergence. If you say, take the culture of a white person in New York and compare it to the culture of a white person in Alabama, I mean, it's night and day, right? So it's not clear to me that taking in, and also we already have a culture that's been massively crafted by globalization and immigration. I mean, some of the biggest aspects of our culture, like jazz, rock and roll, rap music, Mexican food, pizza. I mean, this all came from foreign immigration. And so I think to say that we have this like American culture that exists as like separate from other culture and other peoples that we would be jeopardizing by allowing in immigration. I don't necessarily buy into that argument.
Oh yeah, I don't. So I don't know if you've heard me talk on this at all, but I don't think culture actually has any kind of genetic or racial component. I think it's purely on what is taught. So how would you define culture? Because I heard you say a lot of racial. Like, it sounds like your definition would involve a lot of racial things.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be racial. I guess culture I would just define pretty generically as the sort of the practices and the traditions that people engage in with respect to like the kind of art they enjoy, the kind of philosophy they engage in, oftentimes the kinds of governmental structures that they create. I think all of these things sort of play into what we would call someone's culture, I guess. I totally agree that I don't think there's anything innate or genetic about culture, or at least if that is the case, I've not seen any compelling evidence for that. So yeah, I would totally reject that, especially because individual races can cultivate such massively different cultures based on different circumstances. Like I said earlier, the culture of a white person in the South is going to be much different from the culture of a white person in San Francisco or something like that. So yeah, I definitely agree with that premise.
And then you kept saying white people, right? And I'm not saying that you're on this boat, but do you think if you were to actually critically think about when you use the term white people, is that really a race of people? Like Andrew here is Irish, and I bet you're some kind of Germanic descent, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just guessing out of the blue. And obviously we know if we just look at all these bordering European countries that they've fought for thousands of years. So why all of a sudden do you start using that term white people where they make you guys seem like you've always been together?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is certainly I think that's a valid observation, and it's an observation that I've pointed to in the past when arguing with white nationalists when they want to say like, I want to create a white ethno-state, and it's like, I mean, the concept of a white people isn't really something that's ever existed historically. I think that maybe the concept of, being white is just sort of a shorthand.
It's an easy get around.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I mean, I would never use like the concept of like white people in any serious like geopolitical analysis or something, because I think the categories are much more nuanced than that,
right.
Especially in Europe.
Right. Andrew, you look like you wanted to ask something.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I was going to ask you, as far as globalism and nationalism are concerned, I think you fall under more of the globalist camp, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would.
Can you tell me why it is that we can't have a strong nation and still engage in things like global trade and engage globally with other nations as has been traditionally done? Why, in your opinion, you think it's better to have a more globalized economy and a more globalized citizen, if that's the right term?
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends on how we're going to define nationalism. So, I mean, I don't have any problem with, say, like patriotism or something, or like, taking pride in one's country, or, seeing a country as a set of concrete ideals that we all sort of unite around. I think there's value to that. And I think it's like pretty cringe when a lot of people on the left will like weirdly, shit on America as like a performative thing or something. So, I mean, I'm all for like, having pride in one's country and so on. I guess when it comes to my aversion to nationalism, it's just going to depend on what we mean by like what would a nationalistic like policy look like, for example, because I would say that I'm in favor of like increasing immigration. I'm in favor of, more global trade because I think it would be economically beneficial. I'm in favor of a more sort of globally integrated system of government, just in virtue of the fact that I think some of the biggest problems that we face, like climate change, bioengineering, AI, etc. These are by and large problems that can't be solved on a national basis and require a greater degree of like national integration and cooperation, and like global legislation. So yeah, I guess I would just say like in terms of like policy, where I end up is usually just going to align with what people would consider to be like globalistic, I guess.
Well, so to kind of give you just a little bit of pushback on that, to give you a hypothetical, it's not a likely hypothetical, but it maybe would flesh out your worldview a little bit better. Say, for instance, the United States government could enact a policy, a financial policy that would drastically help with the increase in domestic birth rates, but that would come at the expense of possibly immigrants coming from south of the border for social programs and things like that for them. Would you support the localized policy that would be a national policy to increase our domestic birth rates for our citizens, or would you say that that was a bad policy?
Well, I mean, I certainly support policies that would increase like native fertility. Like I support, for example, like a universal child allowance. I think I have a video of that on my channel where basically I see this big problem with free markets where if you're in a free market and you have if you have a child, that child is purely just going to be a drain on your resources, because children don't produce any income and they cost a lot of money to take care of. And so the result of this, and also you have this additional problem that compounds that, where the age at which most people have children is typically the age where they're going to be making less than they'll make throughout their entire life. Because, usually when people have children, they're in their 20s where they're working entry-level jobs and so on. And this leads to an outcome where, on the one hand, you have people who are not having families that they want to have because they're afraid of going into poverty. And on the other hand, you have people who go through with having those families and then they wind up in poverty as a result. I think those are both pretty morally abhorrent outcomes. And so I support policies that would give people financial support for having children and so on. I guess I'm not sure. I feel like I can advocate for that without necessarily
right. I guess the purpose of the hypothetical wasn't to ask you whether or not you would support domestic birth rates or not, but rather if there was some way financially that the United States government needed to do that at the expense of another nation with our wealth or whatever, would you still support doing that? In other words, the hypotheticals to infer if there was something that was for the good of your own country, but may necessarily come at the expense of another one, even if it's your own money. would you still support a policy like that? In other words, inferring, would you put maybe your own nation ahead of another nation if push came to shove?
I think that it would depend firstly on how much the policy would benefit my nation, and secondly, it would depend on how much it would hurt the other country. So like I wouldn't support passing a policy that would like massively harm some other country for like some marginal benefit for my own country. I don't inherently value the well-being of Americans more than the well-being of someone in another country. I basically value all humans, all sentient beings equally in terms of their moral status. So yeah, I guess. But if it were like we could implement a policy that would massively benefit Americans at some like marginal cost to some other country, then I would support that.
So. I guess that's probably as fair of an answer as you can give without a ton of details. I guess that's just kind of my way of seeing if I can flesh out at what the delineation point is before you consider it my people, if you're a globalist, because I think that line is really easy to kind of set if you're a nationalist, right? So if you're an ethno-nationalist, it's probably really easy to set. And if you're a civic nationalist, I think it's also easy to set because you define pretty much everything within the borders of your nation as being your people. The globalist thing, though, that seems like it's a little bit more difficult to define who your people are. I wonder if you can kind of flesh that out for us a little bit.
And are you a globalist, by the way?
I think I probably would consider myself a globalist. In terms of who my people are, well, I mean, if you just mean like what people I want to like look out for, or like what people I value morally and like consider in terms of, what we should be doing, I would say that I value all human life equally. I mean, I just value the pain, suffering, and pleasure of conscious creatures, whether or not you're living in Africa or in New York. I will value, I'll weigh your moral status equally, right? As a person who has conscious experience and therefore has the capacity to value your own experience, etc.
So an interesting hypothetical that was given to me one time was, if it's your family or somebody else's family first, who do you pick?
I would pick my family. Yeah.
Your family first. So I think the point of that hypothetical was to extrapolate within a country, maybe who's your family, who are your people, who aren't your people. Do you think that it's a fair critique to say that you might care for the people who are within your community and inside of your nation a little bit more than you may care about people who are in other nations that you really, you have a pretty much a disconnect with?
Yeah. Well, I think I would totally understand why somebody would feel that way. And certainly I wouldn't call someone like a bad person for feeling that way or something like that. When it comes to the example about the family, right? I think in general, I would consider myself like some version of like a consequentialist, where like on a basic like sort of moral level, I value everybody's sentience, everybody's conscious experience equally, and I want to do what will make things go best, like on the aggregate for all people, right? Now there's this sort of counter experiment or counter like argument to that sort of a view, where someone's going to say, well, if you could save your mother or two strangers, clearly you should save your mother, not the two strangers, even though like overall you would be causing more suffering than if you would have allowed your mother to die to save the two strangers. And my view on that is that I think that there are certain like heuristics or dispositions that we can cause ourselves to have that are justified on a consequentialist view, because us having that disposition is what makes things go best. So for example, I think things go best when everybody cares about their family, right? Because if I don't care about my mom more than I care about my strangers, then obviously my home life isn't going to be great. I'm not going to have any attachment to my family. And if everybody had that disposition where they just don't care about their mom, then that would be bad in terms of overall consequences. And so I think it's justifiable to value your own family over strangers, because everyone adopting the disposition of prioritizing their own families makes things go best. Now, whether or not that applies to the nationalistic case, I'm not sure. It would just be a question of whether or not things go best when everybody decides to morally prioritize the people of their own country to a greater degree than people of other countries, and whether or not taking up that disposition has a positive impact. I'm not sure. I could see some arguments for why it would. I could see some arguments for why that might cause some degree of harm. I'm not sure.
To steal a line from Omni, right? Intuitively, what would you think?
Well, I partly feel like with respect to nationalism, part of what I mentioned earlier is this idea that all of the biggest sort of existential risks that I think humans face, whether that be AI, biotech, climate change. Climate change isn't that much of an existential threat, but all of the existential threats that we face, and all of the most serious, I think, moral atrocities, I could throw in like the animal agriculture industry. I think that all of these things can most effectively be dealt with, and maybe can only be dealt with on a sort of a globalized basis, where countries are cooperating with one another, creating sort of global legislative power structures, etc. And so I think maybe this view of sort of adopting this disposition where we're prioritizing our own country at the expense of other countries and at the expense of the global community, I think that might be a disposition which is not conducive to making things go best.
I'm going to kick this over to Pedro in just a second, but I did have one more thing that I wanted to ask you. Mm-hmm. This is something that I hear a lot. Obviously, I run in a lot more right-wing circles than you do, but and this one's from Alexius, and this wasn't even a question, just kind of an observation. White nationalist is largely a media slur. It's been my experience that there is a lot of media slur for white nationalism, that it's a very overused phrase to try to paint people who maybe even have more moderate positions as being extremists. Would you agree or disagree that that's true?
It's hard for me to say, because on the one hand, there are a lot of situations where people accuse somebody of being an extremist when they're very clearly not. So, for example, people have been calling like Destiny a Nazi for a long time. People will call Vosh a Nazi, which, whether or not I have my issues with Vosh, I don't think he's a Nazi. But there are certainly a lot of people who aren't radical, who get lumped in with radical. But on the other hand, there are a lot of people who probably are a lot more radical than they let on, who will sort of hide their power level a lot of the time, and say like, "Whoa, I'm not a white nationalist," and then will JQ in their private Instagram groups and so on. And so, yeah, it's hard for me to say, really. Certainly there is a lot of overzealousness, for sure, with who we label white nationalists.
So the parallel that I like to draw, and I wonder if you agree with this, is I also think, and I agree with you, that there is that whole hiding the power level thing. You know what I mean? It does happen. I've seen it many times. Sanzo and I were in a Discord listening to it one night. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I do see the same thing with communists on the left. And they're hiding their power level just as much, but that seems like it's a lot more socially acceptable. And I wonder if you could tell us why you think that is, because it seems just as dangerous to me.
Yeah. It's hard for me to say. I don't really know why. I think that when it comes to like the radical, we need to, violent revolution, execute the capitalists, all
Get
that.
Rid of the proletariat. Did they ask the proletariat?
Yeah, exactly. I think all that is insane, and should definitely be treated more harshly. Why it's not considered more
like treason?
Yeah, well, I think that probably the reason is just that while communists, like radical communist revolutionaries, might advocate for like means or methods that are completely insane, I think that they're sort of core values when it comes to like egalitarianism, equality, etc., probably are more in line with what's mainstream culturally acceptable, as opposed to Nazis who, or maybe not Nazis, but like white nationalist alt-righters who, in addition to advocating for some of the same violent means, also have views about racial superiority and all these things, which are just sort of deeply contradictory to the mainstream sort of cultural narrative that we've come to adopt in America.
Pedro, I'm going to kick it over to you if you want.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So you said something that kind of threw me for a loop. Can you maybe you know the answer? Can you take me through the logic train? I'll totally abandon everything I know. How can Destiny become a Nazi in anyone's mind? Just take me through that logic really quick.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, Destiny is. I think that a lot of people were really upset about his, mowing down dipshit protesters line or whatever.
The Kyle Rittenhouse take?
Yeah, the Kyle Rittenhouse take. I think people are really mad about that.
Wasn't that just because he humiliated Vosh, though?
Yeah, maybe.
You mean humiliated? No, he just over the rail with Vosh.
Yeah,
that was what happened there. But continue. Go for it.
No, I mean, I think that's probably part of it. Also, part of it is just, Destiny is obviously left wing, but he's not like a revolutionary communist. And I guess to a lot of people, that's equivalent to, making him like a fascist or a Nazi. Yeah, I mean, people just have like these really crazy, like off the rails standards for what makes someone like a white nationalist or a Nazi.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's a useless term now. They're making it because anybody can be. You can throw it at anybody, and it doesn't really mean anything anymore. Especially if you're calling someone like Destiny a Nazi. You've heard about the Texas abortion thing, right?
Yeah.
What is your take on that? I want to hear this.
I think it's bad. I don't support banning abortion, especially not that early. I mean, I think they banned abortion based on like the heartbeat. So in Texas, abortion is banned before the presence of any like neurons in the brain, right? Which I think is just absurd. Okay. Which I guess we'll get into that more in the upcoming debate.
No, you're chill. Yeah. Oh yeah, that kind of gives away everything.
No worries.
Dang.
Yeah, what are you doing?
My bad.
We're trying to set him up for failure just because he's a progressive, aren't you?
I know, right? My bad.
Exactly.
Okay. Well,
I did have one more thing. Mouthy, you're an essayist. Is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How did you get involved in doing essays? And make sure you tell people where they can find those essays. And those are somewhat a part of your income, are they not?
Yeah. So I started doing essays for free before I really had a YouTube channel. I had like an Instagram account. It was called Mouthy Infidel. I somehow randomly stumbled into this niche like political community on Instagram where people would just like post essays and then argue about them and then like debate over Instagram Live and stuff like that. And so I started an Instagram account where I would start uploading political essays on Instagram. And then I stopped doing that and I started doing YouTube instead. And I sort of deactivated my Instagram account. And then I guess I was creating a Patreon because my YouTube channel got big enough to the point where I was like, oh, maybe if I started a Patreon, I could actually, make a good amount of money, a non-negligible amount of money at least. And so I was thinking about what I could do. And then I was like, oh, yeah, because after I closed my Instagram account, people had been, constantly spamming me saying like, where's your essays? Write essays again, like that kind of thing. So I was like, oh, I guess I'll just, write essays as a Patreon benefit. So yeah, in terms of where you can find that, it's just patreon.com/mouthyinfidel. My lower tier is, I think, $5 a month. And I try and write essays semi-frequently, but sometimes they take me a long time to do all the research and stuff.
And those the essays you write aren't extreme left, are they?
I don't think so. No, I don't think I'm very extreme.
There's kind of a lot of meat on the bone there. I would recommend that people go and subscribe to the Patreon for Mouthy Infidel, because some of the positions that he fleshes out are some of the argumentations that you're going to be hearing in the future from a whole lot of people on the left, and it's kind of like a front row seat to what's going on in that thought process. There are a lot of left-wing communities, and you guys do argue these things amongst yourself constantly, don't you?
Yeah.
And within the confines of that, you're trying to get the best arguments together that you possibly can, and you take it fairly seriously. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think generally speaking, I think I make better arguments than most of the people on my side. But also, that's not saying much. Part of what I'm trying to do is encourage people on the left to be more thoughtful, because some of the major advocates are just woefully inadequate, in my estimation.
Are you now? I remember last time we talked about Vosh, you were kind of giving him some credit still, but have you totally just thrown him over the rail now at this point in moment?
I mean, I'm like, I don't actively dislike Vosh. I don't really spend much time thinking about him. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan, I would say. He's okay. Like, I mean, he's not like, he doesn't actively infuriate me like someone like maybe I don't know, like Jimmy Dore would or something like that.
Oh, you don't like Jimmy Dore?
I don't like Jimmy Dore.
Okay.
I think he sort of represents this modern brand of, and Kyle Kalinske as well. They both sort of represent this sort of anti-pragmatic, anti-getting shit done kind of left, which is more concerned with like posturing than actually getting policy through. And that really infuriates me. But yeah, I mean, Vosh, like there are things about his character that annoy me. And there are positions that he holds that I think are pretty absurd. Specifically with respect to some of his philosophical beliefs, I think are a lot of them are pretty indefensible. But yeah, I mean, I don't actively dislike him or anything.
Gotcha. If you could debate Jimmy Dore or Kyle Kalinske or both at the same time, would you?
Oh, absolutely. I would love to.
Which one? I mean, which set? You could probably do it both at the same time if you had the right moderators.
I think I probably could do both at the same time. I don't think either of them are that thoughtful. Like, I don't really hate either of them. I just like Jimmy Dore more than Kyle Kalinske, because Jimmy Dore has really concerned himself with actively sort of trying to attack and malign the people that I think are, like the AOCs of the world, the, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, like the people who are actually, in politics, and Bernie Sanders as well, people who are actually in politics and getting things done. People like Jimmy Dore just want to like malign these people as hard as they possibly can as a sort of virtue signal, for the most like pathologically silly offenses as well. Like it'll be something like AOC endorses like Andrew Cuomo over a Republican, and Jimmy Dore is like, oh, she's a sellout shill. And it's like, dude, like, how are we gonna like get shit done if we're not even allowed to like make like basic political maneuvers? Yeah, it's just sort of annoying.
So would you say you're a pragmatist?
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
Okay, so you would be reasonable with someone on the right if they came with like, say, you asked for an example of a policy that's nationalistic, and then one I would put forward is no foreign company lobbying. You can't do it, like outright. There should be no reason why any political official or even like a mayor of a town should have contacts in Istanbul or Singapore or something like that because of some awesome Nike store or something like that. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I mean, I would agree with doing away with both foreign and domestic lobbying. But yeah, I would agree.
There's light for this guy yet, man.
Mouthy's all right. Just we're down to about 5 minutes on the wire here. There was two other things that I wanted to ask you, which is one, who's your dream opponent?
That's interesting. That's an interesting question. I would say I would just love to debate like any of the big conservatives, like, Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh. I would love to debate any of these people. Because I just think like it's weird. I think like the more popular you get, with respect to like if you're looking at a distribution of like political commentators, the bigger the political commentator is, I think the less thoughtful they generally are, which is like a very strange phenomenon. But like, at the top you have people like, Bill O'Reilly, the sort of Fox News anchors who I think are like bottom of the barrel. And then like a tier below that, you have people like Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro who are, also pretty, I think, not very thoughtful and not very well researched.
Well, I thought Shapiro took out Sankey Gur in their debate.
I didn't see that one.
Yeah, I thought he did a good job. I think if you went and watched it objectively, you would probably agree with me. But Shapiro maybe is the exception. He's always been a pretty good debater, to be honest with you.
Oh,
yeah,
Ben
that's part of why I love to talk
Charlie Kirk, on the other hand, I don't think you're going to have much in the way of people giving you a lot of resistance that anybody at Conservative Incorporated is much of a debater. So,
yeah.
Did you have anything else there, Pedro?
Oh yeah, race realism and critical race theory to me are two sides of the same coin, which I have thrown and flicked into like the abyss in my mind, and never do I want it to return. Do you feel the same way?
Well, I think that we get into a lot of like weird semantics with critical race theory, because I think a lot of people will critique critical race theory, and then a lot of other people will be like, well, no, that's not critical race theory. That's, something else. And I don't know, I'm not really super interested in the semantics. I will say that like if critical race theory just means we're analyzing how like systemic racism is perpetuated by the legal system or something, then I think that's like a pretty defensible way of analyzing things. If critical race theory, on the other hand, is meant to refer more colloquially to like a lot of the racial essentialism that we see on the left, where it's like, I forget that one pamphlet where it's like hard work is like white culture or something like that. Like if these kinds of, like if this is what we're talking about when we say critical race theory, then I do actually think that there's a strong sort of connection between those sorts of attitudes and memes on the one hand, and then race realism on the other hand. And that sort of tie is like what someone like Adele Fried would call like racial essentialism, which I think is, so I do think that there is a connection there, but I wouldn't necessarily associate it with what I understand critical race theory to mean.
Would you, at this, like if we both examine both of the ideologies on a foundational level, would you say it's a fair take of me to say we are going to make decisions based off of race? Period. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I would be careful because I don't necessarily oppose making some decisions based off of race. It just depends on like what the decision is. So like if we're making the decision based off race that like we're going to limit the amount of brown people coming into our country because we think they have like they're genetically inferior or something, obviously I disagree with a proposal like that. If when we say we're making a decision based on race, and what we mean is like we're going to institute some economic policy to try and like decrease the amount of economic inequality between black people and white people, then I wouldn't oppose that. So it just depends on what we mean, I guess.
Okay. And then how would you, if you had to give me a solid definition, how would you say you see race realism?
I think race realism is generally like an empirical hypothesis that there's some deep sort of fundamental genetic immutable difference between races, whether that be in propensity to commit violence or IQ or, whatever the classic debates are about. I guess that's how I would define it.
Cool. And then now I'm kind of going there. You said something key. Aggressive in nature, bad behavior and stuff. When I think of the cures to this, it would be cultural aspect, from the cultural aspect, and I would say it would be more of a Christian. How would you feel about Christian nationalism per se?
Well, I'm not a big fan of nationalism, and I'm also not a big fan of religion necessarily. I don't like. I'm not like super anti-religion or anything like that, but I also think that there are some respects in which religious belief can be a hindrance on society. But I think I definitely don't think that religious belief per se is super necessary to, ail a lot of our social ills. So, for example, like, the Nordic countries, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Norway. I mean, these are the most secular countries in the world in terms of people's religious belief, and yet they also have pretty thriving cultures, rank pretty highly on like social progressiveness indexes, happiness indexes, etc. They seem to be doing pretty well. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think that, yeah.
Can you do me a favor? Because Andrew's going to shut me off. I'm not going to be able to proselytize after this because the blood sport is about to begin. Do me a favor.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to read Philippians, specifically chapter 2, you would get a sense of what actually I have the idea of implementing. And I just want to hear your thoughts on that. Next time, maybe we get a chance to talk.
Sure. I'll check it out.
I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Bloodsport begin.
We're about to get into the debate. We're going to put Mouthy in the back. Thanks for answering some of our questions, Mouthy. Real quick to you, Jason PK. Isn't this supposed to be the crucible? So what's with the softball questioning of a blatant anti-voluntary or voluntarist totalitarian? It's a neutral ground for debates. I'm not debating with Mouthy Infidel right now. Pedro's not debating with Mouthy Infidel right now. Right now, we're just talking to him and fleshing out his worldview. If you want to debate with Mouthy Infidel, then come debate with Mouthy Infidel or shut up.
Yeah, the arena's open. We were trying to keep the sand wet, so if you want to help with that, I think this kid might actually cut off your head in it.
Yeah, but anyway, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get this debate moving.
Right.
It's debate night, and we're going to go at it. Tonight we've got Zen Shapiro and Mouthy Infidel. Mouthy, this is the first time that you've debated on the Crucible, and we'd like to welcome you. Zen, your return. Last time didn't go so hot.
For the other guy.
What do you mean?
Right,
yeah,
he the other guy.
Chopped that guy's head off.
So the way that this works is you guys will have 5 to 7 minutes to make your opening statement. The debates here last a little bit longer than they do on most programs. The approximate runtime is usually about 2 hours. We really want to let you guys go at it. The introduction, after you're done, we're going to open up the floor. We're only going to step in if we see the conversation going off the rails or if you ask one of the moderators to step in. With that, we're going to let Mouthy open up.
Okay, so so I've never debated abortion before. I actually don't have that strong of a position on it, but Andrew asked if I wanted to debate it, and I couldn't turn down the opportunity. So I've been thinking for the past few days about how to go about this. So then I watched one of your debates, and so I think I have the general argument down. So the argument which my opponent is going to lay out is quite simple and can be, I guess, formalized in the following way. Premise 1, it is wrong to kill an innocent human being. Premise 2, a human fetus is an innocent human being. Conclusion, therefore, it is wrong to kill a human fetus. Inevitably, most people on my side of the debate will start by challenging the second premise. I actually think that's a mistake. I'm completely ready to grant that a human fetus is an innocent living member of the species Homo sapien. What I'm not willing to grant is the first premise. To be more specific, I do not believe that moral status should be granted based on one's membership with the species Homo sapien. I would defend the position that whether a being is or is not a member of our species is in itself no more relevant to the wrongness of killing it than whether it is or is not a member of our race or our sex or our eye color category or whatever. To reiterate, I believe the conservative defense of the life of the fetus is based on a characteristic that lacks moral significance. Once we've realized this, the question shifts. Rather than arbitrarily valuing the fetus because it's technically a human, we can look at it based on the actual characteristics it possesses and asks whether the characteristics which are morally relevant are possessed by the fetus, things like sentience, consciousness, etc. If my opponent wants to defend the view that the moral status is granted by species membership rather than any of the morally relevant traits that I listed, he's going to have to face some pretty repugnant conclusions. Let's say, for example, we scanned your DNA and it turned out that you were not a human somehow, despite you still possessing all of the mental and physical attributes that you currently possess. Would you suddenly lose moral value? Or what if, while exploring the cosmos, we came across an alien civilization that looked and acted like humans, were as intelligent and as emotionally complex as humans, were morally good, only wanted to help each other and other species, etc.? Would these beings lack the right to moral consideration in virtue of them not being human? What if we took the minds of all the humans on Earth and transported them into non-human vessels, say robot bodies or something like that? Would we all of a sudden lose moral value, right? Clearly, we can't accept these conclusions. What these tell us is that moral value cannot be rooted in something as arbitrary as species membership, but rather it has to be rooted in the actual, phenomenological and mental traits that we possess, like the ability to have conscious experience pleasure and pain, etc. So that would be my opening statement.
Zen, you're up.
All right. Thank you for having me on again, guys.
It's not going to go the same way, I promise.
Yeah, I am well aware of that. I'm pro-life. I oppose all abortions. Mouthy's got it. He hit the nail on the head with those first two premises. Human life begins at conception. Innocent human is being killed in an abortion. That is morally wrong to do. I oppose that. Sounds like he makes the argument for sentience or consciousness. What I will do is take that argument and take it to its extreme, see how it holds up. And it sounds like he's going to challenge me by not proposing real hypotheticals or real challenges. He's gonna venture to La La Land, where we have alien species that we've never actually discovered, where we can transport human minds into robots, and where we can determine that somebody born of two human parents would not actually be a human. So when the time comes that we actually discover those things actually happening, we'll humor them. But up until this point, I would think we should stick to reality and flesh out our positions as we know them to be true, as defined by science, as defined by reality. And that being said, yeah, I'm good to go. And by the way, sorry, I might have to go on mute here in a couple of minutes because my fiance is going to come home and my dogs are probably going to bark. So if that happens, just be aware.
Yeah, no problem. Your opponent gets the time. So, Mouthy, if you want to go ahead and start with the response, and we're going to open up the floor.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing is just that, I'm curious what reductios you think my position will lead to. I don't think there are any particularly counterintuitive conclusions that the position I've staked out will lead me to. But on the other hand, saying that a hypothetical is unrealistic is just not going to be relevant. I mean, sure, we can say that in the world we currently live in, it's unlikely for this to happen, but you could wake up tomorrow, this could be a dream. We could wake up tomorrow where in a world where these things are very likely, right? And so the point is just to show that if these things suddenly happened, even if they're unlikely, if they suddenly happened, your moral position would lead us to conclusions that we find very counterintuitive. And the fact that your position will lead to conclusions in these hypotheticals that are very counterintuitive, and what that indicates is that the moral criteria that you've laid out for what gives someone moral consideration does not actually align with our intuitions when we actually start to examine them in depth.
So where do you draw the line on abortion? You okay with it all the way up to term?
Well, I think that at the very least, a fetus is not going to be morally considerable until it has sentience. At the point when it reaches sentience, I don't have a super strong position because on the one hand, there are you do have to take into account once it has sentience that you are taking a sentient life. On the other hand, there are other considerations like the extent to which allowing abortion will increase the happiness of the people who might have access to them, or the families of people who have access to them. So, I mean, I don't have a very strong position, but I would at least take the position that at the point where, before the point where sentience is first reached, there is no reason to have any moral consideration for a fetus.
What does sentience mean?
Just the ability to have conscious experience, to feel things.
Conscious
right?
experience?
Like, sentience might be like, in order for something to have sentience, it would be the case that it would be like something to be that thing, right? Like if I thought about what it would be like to be a rock, it wouldn't be like anything to be a rock, right? But if I thought about what it would be like to be you, then it would be like something because you're having some sort of a conscious experience, some sort of sentience, right?
And how do you verify that something is sentient?
So, I mean, there are a variety of ways. So you can sort of take the integrated information theory route where you basically identify the essential properties of consciousness, which would be like axioms. And from there, you can infer the properties of physical systems that can account for it, which would be postulates. Based on those postulates, you can derive for any particular system of elements in a state, whether it has consciousness, how much, and what particular experience it is having. You can.
And how do you verify any of this?
Well,
Zen, hang on.
Yeah.
Make sure you give him a chance to finish his thought first.
Well, he's kind of talking. It's like I don't know exactly how we can verify that sentience is present.
But he was kind of going through a list there of things.
Sure.
Let him finish his thought.
Yeah, well, there's two things, right? So on the one hand, in addition to what I just said, you can create hypotheses about what neurological or biological features are necessary for or correlate with conscious experience. And we can verify or falsify those hypotheses by testing whether the presence of those features correlates with how we would expect organisms to behave if the hypothesis were true, et cetera. And an additional point is just that I've seen you in a lot of debates appeal to, scientific consensus, scientific authority, right? There isn't any reputable scientific organization in the world who would deny that we have relatively reliable correlates for sentience, right? You're taking an extremely fringe position. And I could send you multiple studies and multiple statements from academic organizations which are taking a contrary line. I also think that...
Okay.
Yeah, this whole question is also supremely relevant.
What neurological and biological processes must be present for sentience to be confirmed?
Well, I mean, like a brain is probably necessary. Neuron activity in the brain is probably necessary. There are more precise things that we can look at.
But do you have any sources that would confirm that at an exact moment of development in the womb where sentience is achieved? Is there any sources you could send me for that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, just give me 1 second. But also, sure. I want to point out
you defined it as conscious experience, right?
Yeah. Like while I'm getting the sources for you, though, I also want to say that this is just going to be. I don't want to spend too much time on this because this is just going to be supremely irrelevant to the topic, right? So, like, let's say hypothetically, right? we could with 100% certainty have access to the subjective experience of another person, right? At this point, would you still object that my argument that we should grant moral consideration based on the ability to feel pain, would you still object to that argument?
This is what I was saying about having to travel to La La Land to defeat my argument. Because we can't verify the subjective experience of another. So you can't use that as your argument. I want to know exactly when sentience is. I want to know exactly when sentience is achieved, and how can we verify that?
It doesn't matter if we can verify. My point is
it does.
Okay. My point is that it's possible, right? We could imagine a situation where we could verify it, right? And if we could, would you still object to the argument? Because if you wouldn't, then you're conceding your original argument, right? Because if you would say no, then you don't actually think that life makes the relevant difference. You think that sentience makes the relevant difference. You just think that we don't have any good ways of measuring that, so we should draw the moral relevance line at the beginning of life for practical purposes.
Sure.
Right?
So to answer your question, I would still object to it, but I think it is important to point out that your line that you're drawing for premise 2 in this equation, where my premise 2 is that human life begins at conception. Your premise 2 is that sentience is achieved at I don't know when. So I think it's just important to hammer that point, that you don't know where you even draw the line. That's what I'm pointing out here, and that's why I keep questioning on it, because it turns out you don't actually have any answers. It's all arbitrary.
So 2 things. So firstly, I mean, I do have an answer, right? Our earliest estimate for when certain correlates with sentience have arrived in fetuses is somewhere around the 8-week mark. I can send you 2 studies on that I have on hand. But also, I just want to say that so your answer was yes, so you would still reject my argument, right? Which means this whole argument is just a distraction, right? The epistemic question of how we go about figuring out X is different from the question of if X is there or not there, does that affect the moral calculus, right? You have to provide. You have to, X is just sentience. I was just using it as a stand-in, right? What I'm saying is that you have to provide an argument that human life itself should be the source of moral value rather than the kinds of considerations that I'm putting forth, right? And clearly appealing to our lack of access to the subjective experience of other beings doesn't achieve that aim, right? So for example, right, to give you another La La Land hypothetical, if let's say that the entire universe was ruled by Satan, right? Satan couldn't change what the moral truth is, but he could make it so that moral truth was such that it consisted in a trait that was impossible to detect in someone in practical reality, right? What this case shows is that the fact that a trait is not detectable does not entail that moral worth does not, in fact, stem from that trait if we could detect it. It's just a fundamentally separate question.
Yeah, but the problem is that you're just creating your own arbitrary axiom for when you place moral worth, and you said an estimate is around 8 weeks, 8 to 10 weeks or whatever. Estimate, not verified. It's not grounded in anything confirmed by the scientific method. It sounds like sentience is defined as a conscious experience, and I've got an article or a study here from the NCBI PubMed that it states that basically consciousness is the awareness of the body, the self, and the world, and that the fetus may respond to stimuli, right? But it's not. But it's in an almost continually asleep and unconscious state, partially due to what's called endogenous sedation, and it doesn't come out of that state until it's outside of the womb. And the only way that you can actually verify a conscious experience is through a first-person interaction, where, say, I can respond to you and say, hey, Mouthy, are you conscious? And then you respond and say, yes, I am conscious. I am aware of what is going on. If you can't do that, you can't verify sentience or consciousness. It's all arbitrary and it's all estimates, as you yourself have admitted. So that's all I'm pointing out. But now we can go to the point. Hang on. No. We can go to the point of humoring of where you draw your moral line of sentience, which is like the ability to be conscious and feel things, I guess, which who knows what that actually means. But and we can test your moral axioms there. We can go on and humor that. I'm just pointing out that your moral axiom is arbitrary and you can't even verify it. Yeah, whereas mine is based on science.
Right. Well, okay. So there's a couple things there. So the first thing is that calling it arbitrary, I mean, the definition of arbitrary is the definition of arbitrary is just based on random choice rather than any reason or system, right? So you're just saying that the line that I'm drawing isn't based on reason.
When
which,
you
I mean,
when you source those things, would you mind sticking them in the private chat, and then I'll get them down to chat?
Yeah. I think I put them in private chat. And so, yeah, so calling it question begging or calling it arbitrary is just going to be question begging, right? When you say it's arbitrary, you mean there's no reason behind the line that you're drawing, which of course is the subject that we're supposed to be debating. So you calling it arbitrary isn't really going to get us anywhere.
Yeah. When I say arbitrary for your stance here, it's arbitrary based on the definition of it's based on random choice or personal whim. For you, it is personal whim. You don't actually know what it is. It's just based on your feelings.
Yeah. So I posted 3 studies, which generally confirm that based on the correlates with sentience that we have scientifically observed, they seem to arise somewhere around the 7 to 8 week mark. So it's not really arbitrary. I mean, there's strong scientific evidence pointing to the line that I'm drawing, right? And now you also said like, well, my line is verifiable, so that means that
sure,
my criteria is morally more salient because it's actually verifiable. I mean, that's just not going to follow, right? I mean, the grayness of a rock outside of my house is verifiable, right? But that doesn't mean that we should be granting moral consideration to rocks in virtue of their grayness, right? Clearly, how verifiable something is has nothing to do with its moral relevance, right?
Sure. And so when we say a human or a being is sentient, what precisely needs to be taking place? Like, let me ask you this: is a person who is asleep or in a coma, are they sentient?
Somebody who's like asleep, yes, because they're having like experience. They're not awake, but they're still having experience. Someone who's in a coma I actually don't know much about comas, but maybe they're not currently sentient.
Okay. So you're saying no moral consideration granted to somebody who's not sentient?
Well, no. Okay. So to be really specific, so I grant moral consideration to 2 types of beings, either beings that have sentience or beings who have had some sentience in the past and have the potential for more sentience in the future, right? So a person in a coma has had sentience in the past, they have the potential for sentience in the future, and so they are granted moral relevance, right? But if you only had sentience in the past, like a corpse, then obviously I don't grant a corpse moral consideration. And if you only have potential sentience, I also don't grant you moral consideration, because that would lead to positions like it's immoral not for a woman not to have sex on every day that she's fertile. It's immoral to take contraception, et cetera, which I mean are just absurd positions.
Sure. So just to point out for everybody to see, he did change his initial argument. He started out with sentience, and then he had to add a new qualifier of potential sentience for that which has already achieved sentience. I've heard this 1,000 times. So what I would ask you,
it's not changing my argument. It's expanding upon it because you asked me.
You expanded it because it wasn't specific enough at the start.
Yeah, because
okay, great. Now you did state very specifically and unmistakably that there is no moral consideration granted to a corpse, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so nothing morally wrong with fucking a dead body?
Well, I think that generally speaking, we would say that you shouldn't fuck dead bodies because on the one hand, that corpse has family members that care about them who probably don't want you fucking the dead body. On the other hand,
there's no moral consideration granted to that corpse, correct?
Not in itself, but there are reasons that we shouldn't fuck dead bodies that have nothing to do with the inherent moral value of the corpse.
That's what I'm asking you. I'm asking you about the morality. Let's say you are the only family member of a dead person. Would it be morally wrong to have sex with that dead corpse?
Yeah. So, okay. So, I mean, this is just going to get a little bit deeper into the sort of the consequentialism question. So my position, and I was just talking with Andrew about this earlier, my position is that we should be trying to adopt certain dispositions and heuristics with respect to how we lead our lives that when we adopt those dispositions, it makes things go best, right? And I think adopting a disposition where you're somebody who wants to fuck dead bodies, I think is a bad way of making things go best for a variety of reasons, right? There could be negative health effects. You could end up fucking a dead body and it like traumatizes the family. There's also this thing of people probably get some degree of well-being from knowing that their body will be kept safe after they're gone, because people have some sentimental attachment to their corpse after they die. So yeah, I mean, I could give a variety of justifications for why.
But you're deflecting from my actual question. My question is,
well, I answered directly.
No, you didn't. So given a scenario where a person dies and there is only one single family member to look after their corpse or whatever, would it be morally wrong for that family member to have sex with their dead body?
I just told you yes.
It would be, but there's no moral consideration placed on a non-sentient being. So
That's
now
right.
you are contradicting.
No,
You are
no,
now
no.
contradicting
Well,
yourself.
That's incorrect, right? So a contradiction would mean that I've affirmed and then negated a proposition. I haven't done that, right?
You have affirmed the
not-
proposition that moral consideration is only granted to sentient beings for
Yes.
that and potential sentience for that which has already achieved sentience. A dead body that has now lost all sentience and has no more potential for further sentience has no moral consideration.
That's
that
correct.
Means,
And I
that
didn't say that
means
they
that
did.
means that you couldn't place moral consideration on violating its corpse, whether it be sexually or otherwise.
That's
can't.
wrong, right? So
No, that's absolutely
so
correct.
on
And
a-
I just laid out
so-
why.
Okay, so I'm going to try and get through a sentence now, okay? So I am going to explain, right, that when we're talking about what's morally okay, right? Let's say I'm just going to take a consequentialist view, right? What's morally wrong is what leads to worse outcomes, right? And so it can be wrong for me to do something to a being that doesn't have moral consideration. Because it has other effects on beings who do have moral consideration, right? So again, if you adopt the disposition where you want to fuck dead bodies, that's a disposition which is likely going to lead to you doing things that are harmful to people who do have moral consideration, right? So you're making this leap where you say, if I think it's wrong to fuck dead bodies, therefore I think that dead bodies have moral consideration. That just straightforwardly doesn't follow, right?
You yourself have stated unequivocally that moral consideration is only to be granted onto beings that are sentient
That's
and
correct.
those that have potential sentience for that which has already achieved sentience.
That's correct.
Okay, so a dead body has lost all sentience and has no further potential for future sentience, correct?
Mhm.
So there is no moral consideration placed on a dead body, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so defiling that corpse sexually or otherwise would not have moral consideration.
No, that doesn't follow. That's my whole point, right?
It's like the Patrick
can-
meme where he's like, "That's not my wallet."
No,
Anybody
no.
who watches
So
SpongeBob
you
knows
are
exactly what I mean.
so I'll break this down. So the logical mistake that you're making, right, is you're assuming that if I think it's wrong to fuck dead bodies, therefore, I grant inherent moral consideration to dead bodies, right? But that's not actually the case. I can say that it's wrong to fuck dead bodies, not because it's violating the moral worth of the dead body, but because it has other effects that on beings that I do think are morally considerable, right?
It is the official position of the Crucible that we do not endorse fucking dead bodies. Just so
Yes.
that everybody
Based-
knows the official position here: no dead body fucking. Back to you, Mouthy.
Yeah, I mean, it's just what you're saying just doesn't follow, right? You're saying
No, it does. It does completely. But this is what I would ask you. You're saying
So I've broken down like three times why it doesn't,
your
and you
moral
haven't
axiom.
responded.
Your moral axiom that you've set forth is that moral consideration is only granted to sentient beings and the potential for sentience, which has already achieved sentience. And now I'm asking you why. Basically, when I ask you about a dead body and defiling a corpse, why that would still be wrong? You're saying because there would be other issues. Well, what if it's just a person who has a necrophilia kink for whatever reason, and there's nothing else to it? They just want to have sex with the dead body. You can't object to that morally because it doesn't violate your moral axiom that you have set forth unmistakably. Otherwise, you're contradicting yourself.
So I've said earlier that one of the reasons why it's wrong to fuck a dead body is because engaging in the act of fucking a dead body requires you to take up a certain disposition, and taking up that disposition is going to have negative consequences on
What
utility.
disposition?
The disposition of somebody who goes around fucking dead bodies.
Well, what if they don't do that? What if they just want to do it this one time, and there's no moral consideration granted on that dead body?
Okay, so if
I mean,
you're
this is like forever. I know people are probably freaking out listening to this, but I'm just pointing out this is the logical conclusion of this position. It really is. You have to be okay with fucking dead bodies, otherwise you contradict yourself.
well,
You just have to concede.
well, no. So I mean, I think it's funny that you think a society wherein people are fucking dead bodies is a society that would make things go best in terms of consequence.
No, I don't.
I think that's
No,
your
I'm
pathology.
against necrophilia.
Okay, so
No,
then why are
I
you bringing
am
it up?
unequivocally against necrophilia.
Right. So, if my concern is just the best consequences for sentient beings. Do you think that the best consequences will occur in a society where we say it's okay for people to fuck dead bodies? Because if so, then I mean that seems like a you thing. Like, and that's your issue, man.
Well, we're not talking about consequences. We're talking about the morality.
That's
we're talking about
I'm
the
a
moral
consequentialist.
consideration. Hey, we're talking about the moral consideration that you place on living beings or otherwise beings that are sentient. And once sentience has ceased, that is when moral consideration ceases for you. So from a moral perspective, you may not object to somebody defiling a corpse sexually or eating it. I mean, really, cannibalism either. Like you can't object to these things.
I just
morally
explained why I can, though.
No,
right?
no,
Because
you're just saying words and you're just deflecting away from the topic of conversation. Because you're trying to run defense and cover your tracks because you realize that your position entails the permission.
Okay,
You
firstly,
gotta let him respond though, Zen. Let him respond.
So
he's been talking.
Firstly, I gave you several pretty potent hypotheticals to which you responded, "Oh, unrealistic though, so I'm just going to run away and not engage with them." I mean, that's the definition of deflection. If you want an example,
no, it's not.
Of deflection. I'm sorry, you're going to have to let me finish. So that actually is deflection, right? I've engaged with your hypotheticals. You ran away from my hypotheticals because they showed that your moral position leads to heavily counterintuitive conclusions that nobody would accept, right? So, but on the other hand, right, I actually have explained multiple times why I would say it's wrong to fuck a dead body, right? Because as a utilitarian, I recognize that things go best when we adopt certain dispositions and certain heuristics. And any disposition or heuristic which would tell somebody that it's okay to fuck a dead body is a disposition or a heuristic which, when adopted, would not make things go best in terms of utility, right? I've explained this multiple times. The fact that you aren't tracking doesn't mean that I'm just saying.
Are you
words,
a utilitarian
right?
or a consequentialist? Which one is it?
Well, utilitarian is a kind of consequentialism.
Okay. Well, you're not very specific with your worldview, because when I take your axiom that you have created to its extreme and I force you to have to admit to something that is fucking disgusting. I think everybody agrees that necrophilia is disgusting, and I think even you agree to that. But you realize that just staying on that line, on that moral line of I only place moral consideration on sentience. And when sentience is not present, then moral consideration is not present. So you can say there are other things wrong with necrophilia, and frankly, I do agree with that. But I'm speaking strictly from a moral perspective. So this is the key word: moral perspective. I'm not talking about health consequences. I'm not talking about utilitarianism. I'm not talking about consequentialism. I'm talking about the moral axiom that you have set forth yourself.
Wait.
And the moral axiom entails that if there's no sentience, then there's no moral consideration. Therefore, necrophilia is not immoral. You can't say that it is.
Yeah. So, well, okay. Well, I mean, there's a couple things. Well, the first thing is that you can't just say I'm talking about morality, not utilitarianism, because utilitarianism is my moral framework, right? Utilitarianism is a normative moral theory, right? I mean, that's what it is. And on the other hand, right, I mean, I've explained countless times why my moral framework of utilitarianism would not lead to the conclusion that you're saying it would lead to. You haven't at any point explained why my explanation was incorrect. You've just said, oh, you're just saying words. Oh, you're deflecting, without actually engaging with what I'm saying. Like, I mean, do you not understand what I'm saying?
What's incorrect is that you're contradicting yourself when taken to the extreme. Let's just move it back.
I've already explained why that's wrong.
Let's move it to another direction then, because I think anybody who can follow the logical tracking of this sees that you're contradicting yourself. But it's fine.
Yeah,
let's go to the beginning. Let's go to the beginning. Instead of talking about a human that's already deceased, let's talk about, let's say, like a baby that's been born, but they're in like a comatose state. This does happen. You can look up birth asphyxiation. This is very, very common. It's not common, but it can happen, right? I'm not going to La La Land here. I'm saying a baby that's born in a comatose state that is showing no signs of sentience or consciousness, but it does meet the criteria for life, the scientific criteria for life. So therefore it is alive. It needs to be put on a feeding tube or whatever. But it's not crying. It's not moving. It's not doing much. It's kind of just in a sleeping comatose state. Not conscious. You can never verify that it ever has been conscious. Is there moral consideration placed on that baby?
If the baby is not conscious, no, of course not.
Okay, so would it be okay to kill it?
Would it be okay to? Yeah, it's literally there. It doesn't have conscious experience. What do you mean?
Pedro's face says it all.
We're talking about a human being who cannot experience anything. Do you know what it would be? Sorry, do you know what it would be like to be the baby you're describing and then to be killed? Do you know what it would be like for that being? It wouldn't be like anything because it's not conscious, right?
Okay.
The experience of the baby that you're describing being killed would be the same experience of me kicking a rock, right? Because it's not experiencing anything. It doesn't have preferences. It doesn't feel pain. Like what? Like, of course, right? Like you're saying, like, just because a being technically has human DNA, even if it can't consciously experience anything, it should have like moral value. Like, I mean, that's just absurd. Like, you're literally saying that like a mannequin who can't experience anything should have more moral value than like an animal who's exactly like a human, or like an alien who's exactly like a human, who just all of a sudden doesn't get moral consideration because it's based on arbitrary human DNA, which you haven't engaged with any of those hypotheticals, by the way.
Do you have any other methods of dehumanizing a human before we continue? You called it a rock. You called it a mannequin.
I just said, no, I'm not dehumanizing, right? I don't care.
No, you did. You compared it to a rock and a mannequin, and therefore we can kill it.
Yeah, so I'm trying to
even
get
after
out
it's
of
been just let it be known unmistakably. His position permits the killing of babies after they have been born because they are more comparable to rocks or mannequins than
no. I'm sorry. So you're lying, right? I didn't
no, I'm
say
not.
it's
You
okay
said that
to kill.
yourself. Everybody rewind the video.
Sorry. You gave me a hypothetical of a baby who does not have conscious experience.
Yep.
We are imagining a being who cannot experience anything. It is literally just like, it is just human DNA and like human physical attributes with no brain, no mental experience, nothing, right?
One might call this
me saying that it's not that they shouldn't have moral consideration, right, is a far cry away from saying you can kill babies, like in general, right? Like the reason we can't kill babies is because babies are sentient, right? But I also just like I also want to note that like you think of this as like this huge reductio, right? Because you want to say that moral status isn't granted on, silly things like consciousness, right? It's just granted on arbitrarily falling within the distribution of human DNA, right? And I think that position is going to have much, much worse, more abhorrent conclusions than the position that I just gave you, right? And which is why you haven't engaged with any of the hypotheticals. You've just said unrealistic, though, right? You can dismiss the hypothetical if the hypothetical.
Notice that my hypotheticals have been realistic. I said
it doesn't matter.
A body that's dead where there's only one family member to look after it, or a baby that's born in a comatose state. Both of these can occur and do occur, frankly. So, but I'm asking, and I want to point out something you said there. You're like my position is a far cry away from permitting killing babies, but it's actually precisely what your position is. You literally just admitted that it would be okay to kill a baby just because they're in a comatose state. And I mean, let me ask you this, Stephen. Sorry. Does the baby? Are we talking about a baby that has had sentience and is currently in a comatose state, but could have sentience in the future? It's been born, mm-hmm. But it's in a comatose state. And again, this is not unrealistic. It's called birth asphyxiation. You guys can all look this up. So it's never shown any signs of sentience or consciousness that you can verify. It's the only thing that you've ever seen it do is kind of just be in a sleeping comatose state, right? So it's never achieved sentience. Your position, and this is where I would point to your feet. Look down at your feet and realize what your position is. You drew the line that you value sentience once sentience has been achieved, and the potential for sentience after it has already been achieved. If this baby has never achieved sentience, then you can't place moral consideration.
I just looked it up. Nothing about birth asphyxia says that the baby hasn't had sentience, right? Birth asphyxia happens when a baby's brain and other organs are not getting enough oxygen and nutrients during or right after birth, right?
Yeah.
Sorry. So it doesn't matter if they're currently in a comatose state, right? We're talking about a baby who went into a comatose state because they weren't getting enough oxygen during birth, right? We're not talking about sorry. So we're not talking about a being who has not had sentience. We are talking about a being who has had sentience and is currently in a coma.
You don't know that.
Yeah, I just gave you like three studies on the subject.
The only way you can verify sentience absolutely.
I've given you
the only way you can verify sentience absolutely is from a firsthand interaction where you can see it, you can touch it, you can talk to it, whatever it may be. Otherwise, you can't actually verify that it's sentient. The only way you could truly The only way you could measure sentience would be like a reaction to stimuli.
So
which
if you
I
just
don't think you would want to go down that route, because then you would have to value at the moment of conception and even prior, because a lot of things react to stimuli.
Yeah, so if you just want to deny science, that's fine, right? But I sent you 3 studies showing that we have.
Yeah, okay.
Wait. I'm sorry. Like, you're gonna have to let me finish the sentence. So I've sent you like 3 studies showing that we do have reliable correlates for sentience, and that we can derive from these correlates when sentience in a fetus begins, which is somewhere around the 8-week mark, right?
Okay, so your first study here. Let me address your studies.
Sorry.
Sorry
I'm
to
still
you,
talking.
because
I'm still talking.
I want to address the study.
Hang on, we're going to give you your opportunities in. I promise. Mouthy, finish your thought.
Yeah. So, thank you. So, a couple of things. So, for one, I just want to point out that with respect to your earlier reductio about somebody a baby who doesn't have sentience, right? Firstly, with respect to birth asphyxiation, you just got it factually wrong, right? That's not the case with a baby who has birth asphyxiation. The baby did have conscious experience based on the studies that I've provided you. Now, you then pivoted to being like, oh, well, how do you verify it? Which is a different point, right? Your reductio clearly failed, right? But on the other hand, sorry,
hang on, he's almost done. Let him finish his point, and then we'll get it back to you.
If we were positing a baby who genuinely has never had conscious experience and won't have conscious experience, right, which is what I originally took you to mean, right, then that's not even going to be very controversial, right? We already, when we have a patient who's on life support, who doesn't have sentience, who doesn't have the potential for more sentience, we find it perfectly acceptable to pull the plug on them. We do it all the time. So this idea that this is some absurd moral.
I'm not talking about pulling the plug. I'm talking about
no.
I'm talking about going in.
Let him finish, Mouthy.
Dude, he took
him. I said him.
Filibuster.
You need to listen to what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Mouthy, Infidel needs to let you talk.
All right. Okay. But I'm not talking about pulling the plug. I'm talking about going in and stabbing and killing it actively. I'm not talking about somebody who's on life support and just removing their life support, which that's a different conversation. But for the sake of the abortion argument, this is the active killing, not just the allowance of death, not just passively existing while somebody else dies due to some other cause. We're talking about active killing. Now, but I want to address your source here.
Can you actually give me an argument that there's a distinction there?
This PubMed source that you shared says that it says the cortex becomes functional and tracks only develop after 24 weeks, and neuroscience cannot definitively rule out fetal pain before 24 weeks, but it doesn't say unmistakably that pain or whatever sentience. This is talking about pain. This isn't even talking about sentience. It doesn't even say 8 weeks. Where are you even getting 8 weeks from?
Wait, which one are you looking at?
I'm looking at the NCBI article that you shared.
Oh wait, was this reconsidering fetal pain? Oh, okay, yeah. So firstly, that study is talking about. So there's this common idea that the cortex is necessary to feel pain, and then the authors present some evidence that that actually it might not be, and that the fetus at about 13 weeks does have certain biological correlates which give us which allow us to conclude that it might be able to feel pain that early. That actually was that was the wrong one. The other two, hold on.
I mean, these are like 12-page articles or whatever, but either way, you keep using words like this is an estimate of, or we might be able to, we can assume this. None of it is concrete. You have nothing concrete to even go on. But there definitely can be scenarios where a baby is born in a comatose type state. And this is why I'm using this, because the only if I reference Frontiers in Psychology, I'll share this one too. It says consciousness can only be measured through first person reports, which raises problems about the accuracy of even measuring consciousness because of the possibility of non-reportable consciousness and the causal closure of the physical world. Because it's nearly impossible to even verify consciousness. And in fact, I would even go as far as to say it is impossible to verify consciousness unless you're actually interacting with somebody, speaking to them, touching them, whatever. So
yeah. So 2 things. So the first thing is that, again, right, of course, we can never with 100% certainty verify whether a being has consciousness, right? What we can do is we can create hypotheses about what features are necessary for or correlate with conscious experience. We can test those hypotheses scientifically and come up with good estimates for what things correlate with consciousness.
But there's nothing good.
Sorry, can I just, well, You haven't actually read any of the literature. So there's no way for you to be able to examine the strength of the evidence that you've never actually engaged with, right?
And you haven't
Now,
presented
the
any.
other, I've just sent you multiple links.
Okay,
right?
then point to me in the study where we can verify consciousness at 8 weeks.
Okay, do you want me to tell you what the correlates are?
I want you to point to me.
In the first study, in the first study that I referenced, the specific correlates were they took EEGs of the fetus. They found certain paroxysmal patterns which tend to mimic beings that we recognize as consciousness. We saw that they had sleep spindles which tend to correlate with consciousness, and so that's where that came from. If you want me to like break down the empirical evidence, but also
tend to correlate or confirm.
What do you mean? There's no way we can 100% confirm anything. This is like how
okay. So you don't believe in
works.
You don't believe in any sort of absolute truth.
I don't believe that we can have any epistemic access where we can grant 100% credence to any given proposition being true.
So you don't believe in absolute truth, correct?
Okay. Well, I mean, you're just abusing what that word means in philosophy.
No. I'm asking a direct question. I would appreciate you not deflecting. Do you believe in absolute truth?
I just told you what I believe. The problem is you're using.
Do you believe in absolute truth?
What do you mean by absolute truth?
Truth that is, I mean, seriously, you don't know what absolute truth means.
You're using the word wrong.
Truth and absolute truth are the same thing.
No. Okay, so here's
it's that which it's. I mean, if you want my definition, as an objectivist, as an absolutist, my definition and the definition of absolute truth, if it does exist, is that which correlates and confirms what the standard the creator of the universe has set, which is God. But if you don't believe in, there's no way you believe in God. So you probably don't believe in absolute truth, do you?
Wait, pause really quick. Are you a Christian, Zed?
Yeah.
Let's go. Okay.
I thought that was obvious, being pro-life and believing in objective morality. But
all right, my bad. Keep going.
Good. But Mouthy, I mean, you don't believe in God, so you don't believe in absolute truth, do you?
Okay, so
why do you have such trouble answering that question?
I'm sorry, dude. You can't even let me get a sentence out.
Because you're not answering the question. You just answer the question.
Sorry, Zen. If you can let me finish the sentence, I'm sure we will be much closer to having the answers that you need. Okay. So, firstly, right, when you say absolute truth, if you mean that, do I believe that there is some truth, right? Yeah, I think there probably is, right? What I'm saying is that I don't think that we can have epistemic access with 100% credence to what the truth is. Now, that is a very, very different claim than what you're saying. You're conflating two very fundamentally different questions, right? And this mirrors your mistake that you're making when you talk about how much we can verify fetal sentience, right? Because you're conflating the question of whether or not something does make the morally relevant difference. You're conflating that with the epistemic question of how we can verify that thing, right? When these are very different questions.
Do you believe in absolute truth?
I'm sorry, you're just going to keep asking me the same question
until you answer it.
I'm sorry,
yes.
Are you comprehending what I'm saying? I just told you that, yeah, there is some truth, but I don't think we can have epistemic access with 100%.
Dude, it's a very simple yes or no question.
I'm sorry, dude.
Do you believe in absolute
I don't know
truth?
how I could be more clear. You're just not tracking. You are
okay. But you know how you could be more clear by answering with either yes or no. Do you believe in absolute truth?
So by absolute truth, you mean that independent of whether we can epistemically access it, there is something that is true.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Yes. I said yes like 3 times. I'm sorry. So, if my answer is more than one word, you like fail to comprehend.
And what is the standard? What is the standard of that which is absolutely true?
What are you talking? I would depend on your theory of truth. I guess maybe like correspondence to the world.
Depending on your theory, hang on. Depending on your theory of truth would imply that truth would not be absolute. What would be the absolute standard of absolute truth?
Even Christians have different theories of truth. Okay. This is just,
no, we're on board with Zed right now.
Yeah. Okay. No. It's if you're truly a Christian, you understand that truth is that which conforms to the mind of God. And if you believe otherwise, then frankly you just don't believe in absolute truth. So do you believe in absolute truth?
I don't believe in God. I don't think that
so then you don't
God
believe in
is necessary.
Truth.
Sorry, can you provide me what the contradiction is between saying that God doesn't exist and saying that there are things that are true?
Okay, how about this? Yeah. I'll actually provide you the exact contradiction. Because if you don't believe in God, you don't believe in that which is ultimate and the source and standard of all things that are true, untrue, possible, and impossible. And if you say you don't believe in God, but you still believe in an absolute standard of truth, that would mean you believe in some regulating force of the universe that maintains things to be true, untrue, possible, or impossible. So I would ask you, if it's not God, what is it?
What would you think truth is God? Or are you saying that truth? No. Okay. You're not saying that truth is God. I'll help you out with the argument you're trying
God
to make.
is the standard of truth.
Sure. You're saying that God determines what's true, right?
God is the standard of what is true. That which is true conforms to the mind of God and the standard that he has set. Now, I would ask you, if you don't believe in God, but you do believe in absolute truth, tell me, what is the standard of absolute truth?
Yeah, it's just certain. I would say that the standard of absolute truth would just be, I mean, we could cash it out in a number of ways. We could cash it out as what conforms to certain, like the Kantian notion of like transcendental categories or necessary conditions for experience, whatever can correspond with those axioms or coherently aligns with those axioms, we could say is true.
Axioms would imply necessarily that it's not absolute. That would imply necessarily that it's subjective. So I ask again, what is the standard of absolute truth?
Wrong. So
no, it's not
an
wrong.
Axiom is something that is established, accepted, and self-evidently true, right? An axiom is not based on arbitrary personal opinion, right? You're just getting very basic things wrong. And this is why I'm confused.
Guys, we're almost an hour. We're almost an hour in. We're about 50 minutes into this debate, and we seem like we're going way off the rails on abortion. What is your overarching point with asking him what is absolute truth, and how does that relate to abortions then?
Yeah, well, because if we're trying to establish, morality in the I guess he's proposing axioms, but if we're trying to establish what is the standard of morality, what is the standard that makes things true, because it goes back to life beginning at conception. This is concrete, founded in science and biology, and every reputable source will confirm this unmistakably. It's not just a correlate, it's not just an assumption, it's not just we have an idea that this might be true. It is confirmed unmistakably and unequivocally that human life begins at conception. This is an absolute truth as it conforms to the mind of God, right? And so if God is the source of all things that are true, all things that are good, all things that are possible and impossible, then that would mean morality also would stem from this absolute regulating force of the universe. And I'm asking him, if he doesn't believe in an absolute regulating authority, but he still believes in absolute truth, well, one, that's just contradictory. But if he also but if he doesn't believe in that, and he has a subjective standard of morality or a subjective standard of truth, I'm trying to determine what that is and how we can verify this, how we could even use that as an argument.
I see.
Hey,
thank you for clarifying.
Really quick, I wanted to extend an apology to Mouthy Infidel. Hey, my outburst earlier when I said we were on board with Zen Shapiro, unacceptable, unprofessional. That's my bad. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So I'm still just like, you're using all of these. It's very confusing for me because you're using all these philosophical terms, but you're using them like in very basic wrong ways, as somebody who's like familiar with some of these concepts. So like when you say absolute truth, right? Is absolute truth just, so I understand absolute truth. I just like from a quick Google search, absolute truth is whatever is always valid, regardless of parameters or context, right? So, I mean, I could say under that definition that certain things like the law of non-contradiction are absolute truths because no matter, like if you type in a contradictory statement to a truth table, it's going to come out false in all possible worlds, regardless of, the physical laws of what we're talking about or whatever, right? I mean, I'm not sure what you mean, but
so what would secure that?
Sorry, really quick. Dude. So if you're going to say that God is the source of morality, right? I mean, this is just not going to be a position that's very defensible, right? So, I mean, the counter argument to the position that you're trying to stake out can be found hundreds of years ago, right? In Plato, right? Where, have you heard of Euthyphro's dilemma?
No, I want to know what would be the
So I was
what would be the securing dilemma? No, you mentioned you asked.
I'm sorry.
Stop.
Euthyphro's dilemma says that. So Euthyphro's dilemma is that you ask whether or not, if something is morally true and you're grounding that moral truth in God, Euthyphro's dilemma asks, is this thing morally true because God said that it's morally true, or did God say that it's morally true because it actually is morally true? Because if you're going to take the former route, then you're going to have to bite bullets on like, if God said that it was okay to rape babies, it would be okay to rape babies. But if you're going to take the latter, if you're going to take the latter route and say that God said it's good because it actually is good, then you're admitting that there is some source of what is objectively good, what is objectively moral, that is independent of God, right?
Yeah, so I'm going to take the former route that things are good because God says they're good, and I'm going to reject your premise of God saying, let's go molest babies or whatever, because in Malachi 3:6 he states unmistakably that I am God, I do not change. His nature does not change. He's already set forward the standards for morality and for what is good. It's unmistakable, so I reject any premise that suggests that God is going to come down and change. I reject. It's not going to happen.
Well,
I don't know if you clearly didn't watch the debate that I had with Devin a week ago. He tried the same shit on me. Doesn't work. Malachi 3:6 is unmistakable. Now,
right.
I want to get back. I want to get back to.
Okay.
You gotta let him finish, Mouthy.
I want to get back to when you said the law of non-contradiction, where like you can't have a square circle. Sure, I agree with that. But I'm asking you, if it's not God that secures that, what is it?
Okay, so two things. So firstly, your response to Euthyphro's dilemma is not going to work, right? Because if you're going to say that God, it's good because God said it, but it's impossible for God to say something other than what God has already said. Well, in order to say it's impossible, that's going to come back to the law of non-contradiction, right? You're going to have to derive the contradiction in what would be the contradiction, which would be necessarily entailed.
Yeah, I'll tell you what it is. I'll tell you because if God is in my worldview, God is the standard that secures the law of non-contradiction. So God, being that he is the standard of non-contradiction, he can't contradict himself. It would be impossible for God to contradict himself. And if he's already set forth his standards, changing them, and if he's already set forward his standards and he says, I don't change, and it's also impossible for God to lie. So then if he came forward and changed it, that would be a lie. That would not be possible. We're leaving the realm of possibilities.
No. Let's say God doesn't have to change, right? Let's say God from the outset said that it was okay to rape babies, right? So he's not changing his mind, right? This is what he said from the outset.
I reject the premise.
You can't. What's the contradiction?
I just did. God from the outset, what does that even mean?
Do you not know what from the outset means?
Yeah, why don't you educate me?
It just means this is what he said all along.
Oh, well, he didn't. When did he say that?
If he did, right, if you're going to take the position that something is good because God said it's good, then if God did say that this was okay, you would have to say that therefore makes it okay.
Again, he didn't say that unless you can point to me somewhere in some scripture where
right?
he did. But he again.
This goes back to not understand the concept of a hypothetical.
He made it unmistakably clear that his nature does not change, right?
Okay,
so if you're proposing a change to his nature,
right? Let's say it doesn't have to change.
That would be a change to his nature. He's not going to come down and say
he always said this, right? Let's say hypothetically he always said you should molest children, right? There's no change. Let's say we found a missing page of the Bible that said, oh, by the way, you can molest children, right?
Have you found that? You found that page?
It doesn't matter. Okay. Do you know what?
Go find that page. Go find that page and point it out to me.
Do you understand what the concept of a hypothetical is?
Yeah,
I'm genuinely sorry. I'm genuinely asking because I don't think I've ever had a conversation with somebody who just fails to grasp the
because I don't humor the La La Land bullshit.
That's because you can't intellectually defend your position. Right?
Well, what he's asking if in a hypothetical world, if God's immutable characteristics they've never changed, and he were to say in that hypothetical world to rape babies, let's say, within your worldview, would that be moral? That's what the question is to cut.
Again,
but
I would have. If I could tune in for Zen, also being a Christian, probably knowing the Bible. Right there, immutability means unchanging, unstopping. We don't. Sure. He doesn't live it. We don't live in the reality that you're the hypothetical is describing right now. That's why
I understand why the premise is being rejected. I get it, but I just wanted to make sure that Zen acknowledged that was the premise of the hypothetical, whether he rejects it or not.
Well, I would even go a little bit further with like what Pedro said is correct. But I would even go further and say that God's quality, God's characteristics, assuming he exists with the presupposition that he does exist, then he is the necessary, supreme, ultimate, basically the ruler over all things in all worlds. If he exists in one world, he would be supreme in all worlds. There is no world where if God exists in one, he couldn't exist in another, because that would make him not supreme and not ultimate. The definition for God entails that he is ultimate above all else. So again, and he's made it perfectly clear that he doesn't change, and that raping babies is not good. So it's
He
just
doesn't
not
have
going
to
to
change,
happen.
right? So I said the hypothetical I gave was that from the outset, he never changed. He always said that it was okay to do this abhorrent thing, right? Or what if he found a missing page in the Bible where he said it's okay to do that, right? Or do some abhorrent thing that he never said that you couldn't do in any other page of the Bible. So he wouldn't have to contradict himself. He wouldn't have to change. All I'm asking is, if God said this thing is okay, would it become okay? Now, I understand. I don't want to like hold up the conversation or like hold it hostage or anything, because it just seems like you want to have a philosophical debate. But every time you're actually faced with the consequences of what you're saying, you just run from it because you can't engage with the hypothetical. You just say, oh, unrealistic though. Oh, well, this didn't happen in reality, so I'm not going to engage with the hypothetical, right? That's not how this works. That's not how this
exactly
works.
how it works.
Okay, if it's how it works.
I understand you don't like that
really
because
quickly.
because
If
in order
that's how it works,
it's the story, it's the story of the day.
Sorry.
It's the story of the day for the pro-choicers. The only actual like option
I'm not interested in your meta conversation like speech.
No. Listen, this is what I've seen time and time again.
I don't care what you've seen time and time again.
I will give you this. The position that you hold is probably the most competent pro-choice argument. But it's always a constant that in order to defeat the pro-life argument, which is this, I'm taking the pro-life steel man position. I'm gonna go all the way to the end, right? And the only way you can actually defeat that is to travel to La La Land. The only way, the way that I can defeat your position is just ask you, what is it founded in? How do you even determine sentience? Are you okay with fucking dead bodies? And is it okay to rape, kill, and eat a comatose baby? You either have to be entirely inconsistent and admit that your worldview is founded in nothing, or you have to bite some serious bullets. And I mean, you chose the former there. You chose to be just inconsistent and start running from your position. Okay, I didn't run from mine.
There's two. Okay,
I stand on my beliefs.
So there's two things, right? So on the one hand, you have run from everything in this conversation, right? Like you've said, oh, that is how it works. I can just reject hypotheticals because they don't obtain in reality, right? You can do that. That is how it works. Well, okay, that isn't how it works if your goal is to actually assess the underlying intuitive implications of your position. That is how it works, on the other hand, if what you're trying to do is score rhetorical points and just run away from the consequences of what you're saying because you're too afraid to actually engage in an intellectual like dialogue. But that's fine. I mean, if that's how you want to conduct the conversation,
oftentimes
oftentimes
it comes down to like when I realize I can't actually change somebody's mind, or like when I see that your worldview is founded in a completely fundamentally different place than mine. And I understand I'm not going to actually be able to change you. So what I then do is just point to the optics. I point out the necessarily disgusting things that your position entails, and then I just let the audience decide for themselves.
Okay.
I mean, sometimes that's what you have to do.
Let me just say a couple things. So the first thing is that you haven't given me any reductios that have been very forceful, right? First reductio you gave me was a corpse. I explained why, on utilitarian grounds, I can explain why we should tell people that they shouldn't fuck corpses, right? I actually
then do it. Why don't you do that?
Sorry. I did it like 5 times, but you're gonna have to
do it one more time. Why shouldn't you?
Sorry, you're gonna have to let me finish the sentence.
Yeah, let him finish his thought here.
Yeah, so I explained about 5 times why I actually could say it's wrong to do that on utilitarian grounds. And then with regard to the baby example, first, you gave me an example that was just wrong. You said like babies in this condition would be okay to kill in your view. I did like a quick cursory Google search of the condition, and it turns out you were just straightforwardly wrong because those babies had consciousness. Now, if you're going to change the hypothetical to make it actually apply to my position, you're going to have to say that the baby has never had consciousness, is not going to have consciousness, in which case that's just not going to be a reductio because we already think it's okay to kill people who aren't going to have consciousness or have no potential for future consciousness and don't currently have consciousness, right? This is why it's okay to pull the plug on comatose coma victims, right? Now you can say, oh, there's a distinction between killing and allowing harm. You're going to have to actually substantiate that, right? Because in both cases, what you're doing is you're inserting yourself into the causal process and causing the death of another person. Now, if you want to show how these two things are morally different, you're actually going to have to substantiate that because there isn't an obvious moral difference.
Anyway, so let's just keep it correlate to abortion though. Because abortion, we're talking about a scenario where we have a human being that in the vast majority of cases will otherwise survive, right? And your passive existence will just result in them surviving anyway, and they'll be fine, right? And the when you go in and the human intervention is going in and actively killing it. So, I mean, like whether it be early term when you just take a pill and it like melts it, or it's late term and they chop it limb from limb, either way, it's active killing. It's the act of going in and killing something that otherwise would have survived. Whereas with life support, it's like they have cancer or whatever. They're in like severe like vegetative state, and your passive existence, if nothing happened, they would just die from their condition. The man-made intervention is when we go in and support them with life support and removing them from life support. Well, hang on. Removing them from life support, we've added a new variable here where they're already being kept alive by man. I mean, which it's not correlated because this is a human that left untouched to the natural vices will just die, right? So it's not a direct correlation to abortion where left to the natural vices, this human will survive. So that's why I'm talking about the comatose baby. Call it what you want, birth asphyxia, where you never have been receiving oxygen to your brain, so there can be no concrete verification of consciousness at any point in this human's life. So let's when we take that scenario of a comatose baby that has never been conscious, would it be morally permissible to stab it and kill it? Not just take it off life support, stab it and kill it.
Would stabbing it and killing it be the only way to?
I'm asking you, would it be okay to stab it and kill it?
So it doesn't have sentience, right? It's never had sentience, right?
Correct.
Are you stipulating this? Okay, then yeah, I mean it's okay to end the life of a non-sentient being who's never been sentient, right?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. If that's where you want to go with that, that's the.
I'm sorry. Okay. So. Okay. Would
it also be okay to?
So
I already be okay to use it as like a sex object? Like, would it be okay to like rape a comatose baby?
And the reason for that is
why
going
not?
to be
sentient.
So the reason for that is going to be the same reasons that I outlined for the necrophilia case that you very clearly weren't grasping. Now, the other thing, right? The one thing that I want to point out is that, so firstly, I don't think that reductio is particularly potent, right? In order to say that it's wrong to kill the baby just in virtue of its potential sentience, even though it doesn't have sentience and has never had sentience, you're just going to have to say that we should grant moral consideration to any potential life, which is going to lead us to conclusions like it's immoral for a woman not to have sex whenever she's fertile. It's immoral for a woman to use contraception. It's immoral for a nun to be abstinent. Like, the position that we should value potential life in and of itself, regardless of current or past sentience, is just going to lead to pretty absurd conclusions, right?
Yeah, but what you're presenting here are not these actions like not having sex when you're fertile. You're not actively causing harm on a human being that is already existing, already living.
Well,
with
if
its
a
own
being
unique
isn't
genetic
sentient,
code.
you can't harm it.
What? Okay, so somebody's
can you harm a rock?
Somebody's in a coma. Somebody's in a coma and they're not sentient. Can you harm them? Can you stab them and harm them?
Well, they can. They might not be able to experience pain, but I already told you why you shouldn't.
Your words just now were that if somebody is not sentient, you cannot harm them.
Yeah,
so if
course.
somebody's in a coma and they are not sentient and you stab them, did you harm them?
Okay, I already explained earlier why coma victims do have moral consideration
look at him
are
running.
subject to being harmed. Sorry, what are you confused about, right?
Your non-answer to my question.
I'm gonna do this like.
You just asked the question. Sorry.
I'm gonna go really slowly for you. I know you're having a hard time. Okay. So
no, you are.
Good one. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
So firstly, harm, right, is going to imply some moral baggage, right? You're harming a being because that being has moral consideration and you are countering its interests, right? And so by my criteria, right, that I already laid out, a being has moral consideration if they either are sentient or have had past sentience and the potential for future sentience. So therefore, a coma victim or a coma patient, because they have had past sentience and the potential for future sentience, they are worthy of moral consideration. They're subject to being harmed, right? Now, somebody who has never had sentience is not going to be morally considerable. So I feel like I've said that like 30 times throughout this conversation.
What does harm mean?
I mean, I just take it to mean that you're committing some, you're frustrating the interests of a being that we consider like morally relevant.
Okay, and you just made that definition up. It's actually just defined as physical injury, especially that which is deliberately inflicted.
Okay, so could you harm a rock?
Physical injury would imply that it's something that's alive, right?
Well, I don't see why that's the case.
You couldn't injure a rock. You could only injure a living being.
Right. Let's look up. Let me look up the definition of injure. do physical harm or damage to someone.
These are the semantic games you have to play with leftists.
You brought up, like, you're the one doing semantics right now. Like, you're saying, like, is it possible to harm a being, right? Like, I don't know what you mean by harm. Like, if by harm you just mean you're doing like physical.
You've had no problem looking up definitions of words prior. So let's look up definitions of words here.
By your definition, if you want to, okay, I don't want to fight about words. If you want to define injure as you are sort of physically causing some infraction on a being who is technically alive, then sure, okay, you're harming the fetus, right? But again, to say that because you're harming them, therefore it's immoral, that's just going to be question begging, because I don't think that merely being a human is sufficient criteria for moral worth. And that's the
your
whole point
entire
of the debate.
position is question begging. Your entire position is, I've created this axiom that states in the you stated that in premise 2 or whatever, I don't even know how you did it. Premise 1, sentience is what I value. Premise 2, sentience is harming somebody who's sentient is bad. Well, you're begging the question and just assuming.
What? You're just like making up an inference that I never made.
Premise,
what are
premise,
you talking about?
I never said that. You value sentience and potential sentience and whatever. And then premise 2 is that
are you making a syllogism for me?
Excuse me. Yeah, this is your syllogism. Stop running from it.
I've not presented a syllogism.
Your premise 1 is that you value sentience and the potential for sentience. Okay. And then once sentience is gone, you have no moral value on that. Mm-hmm. And then premise 2 is that harming it while it has sentience is bad. So you are question begging that within your premise that it automatically is bad because you say so. What does bad even mean?
So my argument here has not been it's bad because it's bad, right? I have been showing you the logical extension of the position that you're trying to espouse.
Why is it bad?
The problem is you haven't. Okay, you're interjecting with questions while I'm in the middle of a sentence.
Yeah,
so if you could, you've learned a new word and you're really proud of it, but just calm down.
You brought it up first.
So I'm not question begging because I never made the argument that we should not harm sentient beings because it would be harming them, right? Like I never like made that claim. All I've been doing here is I've been saying, here's what I find morally valuable. I think that your criteria for moral value would lead us to some pretty insane conclusions, right? But you haven't engaged with any of them, right? You've just dismissed them because you're afraid.
Insane on what metric of insane?
Yeah, so I would say that if you think that a being who is exactly mentally and physically like you and me doesn't have moral value because they don't have human DNA, I think that's pretty insane.
Insane on what metric of insane? What is the absolute metric of insane we are going with here?
I'm just saying it is deeply counterintuitive to the moral framework that most people would be willing
according
to
what adapt. Standard of morals?
What are you asking? Like, are you asking a meta?
According to what standard?
Or are you asking a normative ethical?
According to what standard of morals are you applying? This is insane and unintuitive. According to morals. Okay,
restating the question doesn't clarify.
Okay, you've stated that this would be that my position is insane, unintuitive, according to morals of some sort. So I'm asking you, what standard of morals?
According to the morals which most people would be prepared to affirm.
How do you know that?
Okay, I'm sorry. Like I'm pretty confident.
Sounds like begging the question.
I'm pretty confident that most people would not be okay with like genociding Superman because he doesn't have human DNA. But maybe that's a hunch. Maybe I'm just
back to the La La Land.
It doesn't matter. Sorry. Like the fact that you can't engage with hypotheticals, like
with La La Land hypotheticals.
That is your pathology, my dude. Right? Like. If you are just going to run from hypotheticals and call them unrealistic, unless you can derive a logical contradiction within the hypotheticals, then the hypotheticals are possible, right? And
when you've entered La La Land where there's nothing, it doesn't need to be realistic. Then you can ground logic and logical contradictions in anything you want, because we've already entered La La Land where the reality where the real constraints of our universe no longer apply, where Superman exists and Superman can fly. I mean seriously.
What constraint?
If we have entered a world where Superman exists, then clearly the physical constraints of our reality, where you can't fly, are not in application. They don't.
No,
they
that's
don't
wrong,
apply
right?
to
Because
this hypothetical. So
no.
if even
So-
the most basic laws of physics and natural laws of our universe do not apply in a hypothetical, then I would imagine that nothing else really does either. You can just create it as you go along. So I'm not even gonna humor that.
Okay, so
It's just not. It's just not gonna
just
happen.
allow me to, so I can just explain really quickly why you just like aren't understanding a hypothetical. So, okay, so
because it's nonsense. That's why.
so you said, right? I mean, the following is like a really funny basic physics mistake, right? You said that in order for there to exist Superman, we would have to violate the laws of physics. Which one? Which law?
Gravity. How does Superman fly?
Wait, sorry. You think the existence of something flying violates the law of
Superman.
gravity?
How does Superman fly? Come on. Yeah.
I don't know how Superman flies. Variety of things can fly. Planes can fly. Birds
you just got to
can
put on
fly.
a cape. Just put on a cape.
The power of the yellow sun is my understanding.
Can you wait?
Where's the yellow sun? Huh?
What's the physical law? Wait, what's the physical law that's violated by someone being able to fly? Right.
Look at this guy trying to argue that Superman can fly in our reality. I mean, come on, dude.
What are you talking about? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying
you're trying to catch me in some
We're so far off.
Yeah,
of where we started, guys. Yeah. We're wrapping this up. 15 minutes till you guys do your closing statements, but I would like to try to bring this back a little bit. I do understand.
I'm just.
This is what I'm trying to do.
I'm in awe right now.
I understand.
Hang on.
Never faced the pro-life steel man position. Okay. This is it. But I want to know because I'm unmistakably grounding my position.
I'm just going to write down my question.
In the absolute standard of the universe. I'm grounding my entire position in the absolute standard of the universe that is God, that regulates all things to be true, untrue, good, not good, possible, impossible, and the like, everything. So I can take every single proposition that I set forth back to that if need be, and I can ground it every single time unmistakably. Mouthy here is just presenting a bunch of axioms, and when I challenge him on how he's grounding any of it, he has no answers. He has to deflect. He has to enter La La Land. He has to say Superman exists, and we can jump to the moon if we so choose. Like it's just ridiculous.
I think one of the helpful exercises right now, and this would actually be helpful for us and the audience. Can you take a second, Zen, and reiterate to us what you think Mouthy Infidel's position is?
Entirely arbitrary. I know his position. He's pro-choice to the extent of sentience and the potential sentience for that which has already achieved sentience, based on his subjective morality, based on his subjective axioms that are crafted out of thin air. It appears.
Really quick.
Can you do the same? Can you do the same thing and reiterate what you think Zen's position is?
Yeah, I think Zen's position is that we should only value human life, but then when shown the consequences of that position, he just doesn't engage. So let's grant for the sake of argument. I'm so fascinated by this line. Okay, so firstly, let's grant for the sake of argument that Superman breaks the laws of physics by flying. Fine. Okay. What if let's postulate a Superman who can't fly. Let's just postulate Superman who doesn't have any superpowers. It's just a human or not a human, but it's just a being like me or you, physically, mentally identical, but no human DNA. Is it okay do they not have moral value? Is it okay to kill them?
Okay, say this again.
Okay, so it's not no superpowers, can't fly, no super strength, no laser eyes, right? It's just like Superman with none of the superpowers. Let's just say it's Clark Kent, right? And he's from another planet, and he's physically, mentally identical to me and you, morally righteous, conscious, all that good stuff, but doesn't have human DNA. Is it okay to kill?
I just don't understand how this could even exist. But if just let the record show you are still traveling to La La Land, where we've got a human-like figure with no human DNA. But I'll still answer it. And I'll say that if it's the moral system that I'm proposing here is that man was made in the image of God, and man has dominion over all other things on the planet. And if we've got a being that has DNA other than that of a human, then the human is greater. So I'm not going to say go out and just kill this being, just like I would say you shouldn't just go out and shoot a dog for no reason. But if we are to put it in a scenario where we've got human, you or me, and we've got human-like figure without human DNA, and we've got a choice to kill one or the other, and you must pick one. Well, I'm going to save the actual human over the human-like being with no human DNA. So does that answer your question?
Yes, roughly, but I have a follow-up. So you're presumably not vegan.
No. Do I look vegan?
We're yoked over here, bro.
So you don't think we should go out?
You think I could get like this vegan, bro? Come on.
So you don't think that we should just go out and kill animals in the same way that you don't think we should just go out and kill Clark Kent? But would you think that it's okay to farm and eat Clark Kent?
Well, again, okay. Well, now I don't even know how to humor that one. But if you want to just talk about cows and shit,
wait,
like,
no, it's Clark. I was talking about Clark Kent.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about Clark Kent anymore.
I know you don't want to. You don't want to engage with any of the hypotheticals.
Clark Kent is a fantasy figure, dude. Stick to reality. This is ridiculous.
Sorry. Can
if
I
you want to just talk about cows, and fish and whatever, again, man has dominion over the planet. If we so choose to farm livestock and we so choose to fish and eat it, then that's the dominion we were granted by our creator, by the absolute standard of the universe. So again, I mean, I'm not, dude. Stop going to hypotheticals that are fantasy, dude. Just get Superman out of your vocabulary.
But I've been taking kind of notes here as we've been going, and I did want to just clarify this one thing for you, Zen. You did bring up the Superman hypothetical, just so you know.
Did I?
Yeah,
no, he did. When did I bring it up?
Let me see the note here.
I'm almost positive it was him.
You said that something about the defying the laws of physics.
Oh,
that was probably in rejection of the hypothetical.
That was when they were ad homming each other.
What I'm saying is, I think that's where the line of reasoning came from, is when you're discussing, what's in reality, what's not in reality, that kind of thing. So maybe I took the note wrong, but that's what I have here, because I thought that it might come back to La La Land or whatever. So I just wanted to see which person might have brought that up first.
Let me just.
We're gonna move in. We're gonna move in. Hang on. I'm gonna give it to you. I swear. I'm gonna give it to you. I know this is contentious. I'm gonna let you guys wrap this debate up for the next 10 minutes. Kind of however you want to spar it out. You guys can just go ahead and spar it out. And then I'd like to do closing statements, and we got a ton of Q&A. So go ahead, Zen. We'll start with you.
All right. Well, you want a closing statement?
No. You got 10 minutes left in the debate.
Okay. Let me just shift it to a completely. It's the same topic, but just a different direction here. So, Mouthy, do you believe in, or are you familiar with the human right to life?
What do you mean, a human right to life?
The right of a human to live and to not be killed, specifically by another human.
Not all humans.
Okay. So in order for the human right to life to exist, it must be absolute, universal, and inalienable. Absolute meaning it exists, it belongs upon existence, so it's intrinsic. Universal would mean that it would apply to all humans, and inalienable would mean that it can't be taken away. Justly. So being that you don't believe that it belongs to all humans, that means you don't believe in the human right to life.
Yeah, so all you've just said is that if it were the case that you believe that not all humans, in virtue of being humans, have moral value, then you would disagree with the position that all human beings, in virtue of being humans, have moral value, right? Like, yeah.
No, I'm talking about the human right to life.
You haven't really said anything informative. Yeah,
no, I'm just trying to I'm just confirming, being that you don't believe in the human right to life universally and absolutely, then you don't believe in the human right to life at all. It's one of those things where it's a zero-sum game. It's all or none.
No, I believe that some humans have a right not to be killed.
Right, and I'm asking, so, but then you don't believe. Well, because then you don't believe in the absolute human right to life, right?
Well, okay, but just because I don't believe all humans have a right to life, why does that entail that I can't believe some humans have a right to life?
So, okay, then who do you believe that rights belong naturally, or do you think we give them to people?
No, I think we grant them. I think.
Okay, who grants human rights?
Who grants? I don't think anybody grants human rights. I think human rights are just like a construct.
Okay, but who
make for utility?
You literally just said I think we grant them. So who grants them?
Wait, do you mean like? Okay. So you could mean two things. So either you mean who do I believe has a right to life, and that's just going to bottom out in who I grant moral consideration to, right? And that's where rights come from. That's where the rights that I believe people should have comes from. It's just going to be based on my personal moral position.
But you believe that human rights are granted, correct?
Okay. I think that there are some human rights that, as a society, we recognize. Sure.
No, I'm asking, do you believe that human rights are granted? Like, are they given to you?
Oh, I think that, like, legally, sure. Like, Yeah, of course. Like
Okay,
we
so-
exist in
so-
a society. The government decides who has what rights to do what.
Okay, so the government grants human rights to its citizens, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're not a citizen of a government, then you don't have human rights, or if a government decides that
Well, I'm
the
not
human right to
making.
life doesn't apply to its citizens, then their citizens don't have a human right to life. Is that what you're
Okay.
saying here?
I'm not saying that. Okay, you're conflating the legal question with the normative question, right? So I'm not saying that I believe that the only case in which someone is deserving of a right to life is the case in which the government grants them one. I'm just saying that in terms of like legality, like I mean rights, as far as I can tell, as they exist in reality, and not just talking about the rights I think people should be entitled to, rights are really like a legal construct.
Okay, so then it goes back to human. So who grants human rights? Like, let's say you just got random human being in Mexico. Who granted them their right to life?
Okay, are we talking about okay? When you say right, are we talking about a legal right?
No, just the human right. Do you believe in
Wait.
human rights? Do you believe in human rights, or do you only believe in government granted legal rights?
Okay. When you say, do I believe in human rights, do you mean, do I believe that there actually exists, like people just have rights in like some metaphysical way? Or do you mean, do you think I believe we should grant people rights, like morally?
Do you believe in an intrinsic, naturally belonging human right?
Oh, no, not as like a part of nature. No.
Okay, so then you only believe in government granted human rights.
Those are the only kinds of rights that I think like exist. I mean, I can say that I believe in rights that, okay. So the thing is, you said yikes, like that's like a bullet bite on some moral position. Really quickly. So what you're not understanding is I'm not currently talking about moral systems. I'm not talking about morality.
I got that.
I was talking about metaphysics, right? So I don't
that.
believe that somebody like has some metaphysical right to life. I believe morally that we should respect, that we should grant people like rights, and we should act as if they have rights, and we shouldn't kill people. Like I believe that is a moral claim, but that doesn't like I don't see how it's yikes to say that like I don't believe that there's some metaphysical entity called rights.
Wait, who grants moral rights then?
Well, the moral rights that I think people should be entitled to are going to be based on my moral system.
Right. So then they're not absolute?
When you say absolute, what do you mean?
Meaning they would apply no matter what?
No, I think they should be applied no matter what. Yeah.
No, but if they're only founded in your beliefs and what you feel, then they're not absolute. That's just by definition. There really shouldn't be any dispute here. So, but this is the thing. If you grant rights to certain humans just because you say so, or you grant, I mean, we can go back to morality. You grant moral consideration to somebody just because you say so, and somebody else comes along and sets a different standard for who they want to grant.
Bless you.
Jesus.
For who they want to grant moral rights to or human rights to. If somebody comes along with a different standard, who are you or who is anybody to tell them that they're wrong? Like, for example, if you've set your standard for who gets human rights and moral consideration for that which is sentient, right? What if somebody comes along and says, I only grant moral consideration to, I don't know, white people? I mean, who are you to tell them that they're wrong?
Okay, so, I mean, that's going to be a meta-ethical question. I was just talking to Andrew and Pedro earlier. I'm kind of agnostic on the moral realism question. So I don't really have a strong opinion on that.
You can always come over, dude. You can always come over. The line's right here. Just step over. We forgive everything.
We're going to wrap this up with the Q&A, and then we're going to move into Q&A. And there's a lot of questions, guys.
Okay.
We really
appreciate. Show he did not have an answer to that.
We're gonna make sure. There's still gonna be more engagement, I promise you, because the Q&A is always that way, and we appreciate you. We know these are a little bit longer, these debates, but I think that these issues kind of deserve that. So, Zen, why don't you go ahead and give your closing statement, then we'll move to Mouthy.
Okay. Well, I was gonna say, do you want to do questions before a closing statement? Because it's kind of weird to do like a closing statement and then we re-engage again. Like, I don't know. Like,
no, just the closing statements on the debates are fine. And then we can move into Q&A. But let's do the closing statement now. Go ahead, Zen.
Sure. So his position, like every other pro-choice argument I've ever heard, was entirely arbitrary. Couldn't actually define when the line is by any sort of concrete, measurable method, whether it be scientific or otherwise. He doesn't believe in any sort of standard absolute truth. It's all subjective and arbitrary, like I said. Push to his extreme, like I said I would do at the beginning. He ultimately became inconsistent, started to contradict his moral axiom when pressed on the value of a non-sentient being. He objected to defiling a corpse that was no longer sentient or eating it. Also objected to defiling and killing a comatose baby that was never sentient. So a lot of inconsistencies there. It probably is because he knows deep in his heart that it's morally wrong objectively, and he's just choosing to reject that for the sake of optics or winning the debate or whatever. And then lastly, his only true, not true, but his only attempts at defeating my position were to travel to La La Land, where we've got, we can jump to the moon and Superman can fly, amongst many other things. And ultimately, it seemed just entirely arbitrary, seeking gotchas that weren't actually there. So,
okay, so there's a lot that I'm gonna have to, I guess, bring up because there's a lot that just wasn't engaged with. So firstly, he again claimed that my criteria was arbitrary. Arbitrary just means like not based on any good reason. So to say that my position is wrong because it's arbitrary is basically just saying my position is wrong because it's wrong. It's just an aggressively question-begging claim. It doesn't actually get us anywhere argumentatively. You said that I couldn't define the line. That's patently wrong. I defined the line at sentience. Then you said I couldn't tell. Okay, so then maybe the claim is that based on sentience, I can't tell you where exactly sentience is. I actually sent you like multiple studies which show where sentience begins in a fetus based on biological correlates that we observe and have that indicate sentience. Also, to the claim that my criteria is morally bad because it's not verifiable, or that your criteria should be preferred because it is verifiable, even if I were to grant those empirical claims, which are wrong, that still would just be supremely irrelevant. Like I said, the grayness of a rock is verifiable, right? But we wouldn't say that just because it's verifiable, therefore we should grant moral consideration to rocks in virtue of the fact that they're gray, right? We could come up with an infinite amount of verifiable things that we would find just totally morally irrelevant, right? Now you said that I became inconsistent. It's just obviously not true. You just obviously weren't tracking what I was saying. And I explained multiple times how I could justify me saying that people shouldn't rape corpses. I explained multiple times why I could say that's the case without contradicting my position that we shouldn't grant moral worth inherently to the corpse. And you didn't engage with any of those arguments that I provided. So I'm just going to take this to be an assertion with no basis. You said that I went to La La Land, which again, the problem with that is that when we're talking about the purpose of a hypothetical, right? The purpose of a hypothetical in moral debates is to show that, look, you've staked out a certain standard, and we can imagine situations wherein that standard would lead us to take positions or conclude certain things which we find highly unintuitive, right? And if, no matter how unrealistic they are, if we can think of these hypotheticals where the position you've staked out seems very counterintuitive, then that tells us that the criteria which you've laid out for moral worth isn't actually a criteria which is very consistent with our moral intuition, right? And so just saying it's La La Land, dismissing it, it's just totally irrelevant. Now, the major point that I want to finish off with is just this, right? Even if I grant, right, that my line of sentience is not very verifiable, right? You're caught in this double bind where, let's say theoretically, we could with certainty verify the conscious experience of another person, right? At this point, I would ask if you still object to my argument that we should grant moral consideration based on the ability to feel pain. If you wouldn't, then you would be conceding your original argument, and you just, take the life thing to be a heuristic, but you think that moral worth is actually granted based on sentience. We just don't have any good way to measure it. But if this is the case, right, you would have to explain why the existence of human life implies the ability to be sentient, but the existence of plant life doesn't if we don't have any reliable correlates. In order to do that, you would have to appeal to scientific evidence about biological correlates to sentience, at which point you're just doing what I'm doing. And if you couldn't do that, you'd have to bite the bullet and say that ripping up a blade of grass is as morally wrong as killing a human. Now, on the other hand, if you would still reject my argument, if we had access to other people's subjective experience, then your whole thing about verifiability would just be a complete distraction, right? Because the epistemic question of how we go about figuring out X is different from the question of whether or not X is the morally relevant feature when we're talking about an ethical system, right? So you have not provided an argument that human life itself should be the source of moral value rather than sentience. You've yet to provide an argument for that. You've yet to engage with any of the hypotheticals that I've posed you. So yeah, I mean, I guess I was hoping for more substance going into this, but there's just no engagement.
Well, we have a
La La Land.
So true.
We have a ton of Q&A. Before we do that, the price of admission to the Crucible is we get to clip both of you guys saying something that we want you to say. So if you look at the private chat, Mouthy, if you could read that out loud for me, that would be great.
I wish I was old enough to drink Big Papa Fascist's beer.
I know, Mouthy. I know. You're not. You're not. And then I got one for you too, buddy. And this one came from Base Moon, and when I saw it, I knew that I had to have you just... Now, I need you to say this in the most animated voice that you possibly can, Zen.
It depends. That one?
That one.
Oh. Yeah, carnivore life. Yeah.
I love it. So I had a couple of questions I'm going to start out with. These are just my own before we get to the audience questions. There's one hypothetical that Mouthy Infidel brought up, Zen, that I don't want to give you a pass on because I've been tied up and bogged down in it myself. And what I figured out is basically just kind of bite the bullet on it. I don't think it really means anything. But when he's talking about the hypothetical of the immutable characteristic of God, and he says, if you were to start with the understanding that God has an immutable characteristic and it can't be changed, and he were to, in a hypothetical world, have a document that says it's okay to murder, you rejected that premise. And I've talked to a lot of fellow Orthodox and Christians about this. I don't actually see what the problem is with biting the bullet on that and just saying, yes, if that was in this hypothetical world the case, then that would be what morality is. Do you see why there would actually be a problem with that?
Well, the only problem is that it is just absolute fantasy land. But again, like even if I were to bite that bullet and say like, oh, in some fantasy land hypothetical, I guess that would be okay because God says so. Well, that doesn't defeat my position in this. So I guess, okay, you've got a point here. Maybe just biting the bullet, it doesn't matter because it doesn't defeat my position.
It doesn't defeat your position. So
it's an absolute moot point.
Yeah.
It means literally nothing because that's what pro-choice is.
But really,
right. So,
but really quick to Mouthy,
as far as the critique goes, is if you just grant the premise that he's asking, you don't look evasive, and it doesn't actually hurt you. So, from my position, I just decided to bite it because, well, it's kind of true, right? So that was
you might have a way with words that he doesn't. So
yeah, this is.
I'm glad. I just want to say I'm really glad that Zen was finally fucking forced, kicking and screaming, into engaging with the hypothetical.
Yeah.
Well, and this is where I want to.
Let it be known that the moderator had to do it, not you, because you couldn't.
Yeah, I know.
This is where Mouthy, I wanted to engage with you on it. Say I call it the AW method, the Andrew Wilson, just grant it. So I've granted you your premise. I'm in the hypothetical world. We reach your logical conclusion that makes us look stupid. What if I, at the end of that, said, okay, can we return back to reality now? Would that satisfy you, or would that be fair?
Yeah, I mean, it would be fair. I mean, so again, like the point of a hypothetical is just like, no matter how unrealistic it is, the point of a hypothetical is just that when we're crafting moral positions, In order for a moral position to be as strong as possible, it has to be a moral position that leads to intuitive conclusions when we actually start to examine the conclusions that it might lead to, right? And so my point with bringing up the hypotheticals is like, obviously I'm not claiming that they realistically are likely to happen. Of course, I would never say that, right? All I'm saying is that you've staked out a position. I can show hypotheticals, which even if they're somewhat far-fetched, they're still logically possible. And so the fact that your system gives us really abhorrent answers in those hypotheticals, that shows
According
that it's not a good system.
According
Right.
to you,
This is just where
you
I'm
didn't
just
even
trying
engage
to-
with any of them,
Well-
right?
well,
If
Matt,
you would have,
they
sorry,
were fantasy.
Zen, if you would have engaged with the hypotheticals, bitten the bullet, and then said, "Okay, I just don't find these."
Here's the problem, though. Here's the problem with engaging in those fantasy hypotheticals.
That would be fine, but you didn't do that.
It's a totally deceptive tactic of just trying to filibuster the conversation into La La Land and stay there as long as possible. That way, you could try to get me to admit to a bunch of fucked up shit because you get to now make the parameters of what is true and untrue in La La Land. Well, I just choose to not even enter. I understand like what Andrew said. It was actually a better way of putting it. He's like, why don't you just grant it? And then Pedro added to the end. Just grant it, whatever. Now let's return to reality where we should have never even left in the first place, and tell me how this even applies.
Yeah,
Like, it wouldn't.
the reason
this was the second. Oh, I'm sorry, Pedro. Go ahead.
No, you're good. And Mouthy, the reason why you just you get such a kickback when me and Zen here, obviously our warrior gene kicks in when our God is trying to be described in some way that he's just not. And that's where the immutable thing comes in. That's where you guys were circling the barrel. I almost stopped you a couple times, but it was just too fun to watch, honestly. And
it was a very, very good engagement, very good debate.
Yeah.
There's no two ways about that. Zen, I had one more question for you before I move over to Mouthy. Aside from the immutable characteristics, it did seem like you had a fairly solid point when it came to the cannibalism and the defiling a dead body and this kind of thing. Do you think that is part and partial for consequentialism, that they just kind of have to bite those bullets in order to have a consistent worldview?
Yeah, and I was actually talking to somebody about this prior to this debate because I knew he was going to make this argument. Like I was prepared for it, and I've heard it a bunch of times. The only way to be logically consistent through and through on this consequentialist argument, with sentience being your axiom or consciousness being your axiom, is you do have to accept that there's nothing morally wrong with necrophilia or cannibalism because there's no sentience present, and there never will be sentience present again. But what he did was he added some new stipulations to make it look like I wasn't tracking when I was tracking to a T, and I walked it from A to all the way to Z and didn't miss a beat. And he ultimately, instead of biting the bullet, instead of biting the bullet, you said that there would be other things wrong other than the moral consideration that you granted. But hang on. So what he did, and he's trying to do it again, instead of just biting the bullet and being consistent, he changed his argument, and now he's inconsistent. So it's a lose-lose either way. It's either be inconsistent or bite the bullet of being pro-necrophilia. So it's up to you.
So if I could just like
go ahead.
All right, I'm gonna try and do this like as slowly as possible. Like I don't understand why you just are not tracking what I'm saying. Okay, it's very frustrating. So here's the problem. Okay, I said that I don't value any being if it doesn't have. So if a being has only had past consciousness, it only has potential consciousness, then it's not morally valuable. It's only morally valuable if it has current consciousness or has had consciousness in the past and has potential for consciousness in the future, right? That's the position that I laid out. And then you asked me, would it be wrong to fuck a dead body? And then I pointed out that I could explain to you why that's wrong without saying.
But you never did.
All right.
Not one time did you?
I did it like 5 times. Anybody?
What precisely is wrong with that? Then do this again. Do this again. Stop saying sorry. Stop saying sorry.
Just tell me
precisely what is wrong.
You're just gonna have to let me finish the sentence.
Just tell me what is wrong with fucking a dead body.
Let him finish, man.
Bro, he filibusters so much.
Right, he didn't interrupt you. He didn't interrupt you when you.
That was actually saying something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So, I said that it's wrong to kill a being if it has current sentience or past sentience and potential for future sentience. Then you brought up a corpse. Now it's true. A corpse does not have moral value in my view, right? A corpse isn't inherently in and of itself morally considerable. But I explained how having sex with a corpse requires that you take up certain dispositions or normalize certain behaviors, which when you take up those dispositions or normalize those behaviors or ethical standards, the normalization or that taking up of the disposition leads to net negative utility to beings who I do consider morally valuable.
So
what
you would
you
place
want to
the
say
same moral
is that there is a
consideration on a dead
contradiction.
body as you would. What about? Hang on. Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. Let me ask you.
Guys, chill.
This is like the last sentence.
Calm down.
Chill.
You've made your point.
This is the last sentence, right?
But
so the problem is I've made my point like 30 times and you're still like not grasping it. So I feel like I just have to go. So I feel like I just have to go incredibly slowly in order for you to.
Okay, great. That was your last sentence. You just said that would be your last sentence. Thank you. Thank you for admitting that was your last sentence. You're done talking now.
You said it's inconsistent.
Listen.
So what that means is that there's a contradiction.
Just let him finish the thought. We're not getting anywhere.
He just talks forever, bro.
So
he's just trying to flesh it out. I know what he's doing.
Okay, so.
But I need to stop him halfway through where he's inconsistent.
So
I want to know this, dude. Let me stop.
No, sorry.
Let me just stop you and clarify something that you said.
Sorry.
Would you place the same moral consideration on a dead body?
I'm just gonna. I'm not gonna engage any questions until you let me finish talking.
I have a question.
I'm not. You can ask.
Zen, I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry. I had, but I muted the mic. I had to. I gotta let him finish the. Just let him finish the last sentence, dude.
Thanks.
Let him
Jesus
finish
Christ, this guy.
Go ahead.
Literally, like just you. I'm
you're,
sure
you're
you can hold
unmuted.
your conversation
I had
for like
to.
5 seconds.
Go ahead. Finish the last sentence.
Right. So what you want to say, you said it's inconsistent. So you believe that there's a contradiction between me on the one hand saying that a corpse doesn't have moral value, right? There's a contradiction between that and also saying it's wrong to fuck a corpse. I explained to you. Yes. See, I know what you're saying, right? Now, if you could track what I'm saying, that would be great. Okay. So what I'm saying is that there is no contradiction. So what I'm saying, I have to explain it to you like you're 6 because I've explained it to you.
What happened to the last sentence?
The problem is I've tried to explain it like I'm explaining it to adult like 30 times and that hasn't worked. So I have to switch my tactics. Okay. So yeah, this is like I'm sorry, I keep saying it's my last sentence, but then you keep interrupting. So all I'm saying, right, is that
go to like 4
you have to say that there's a contradiction between me saying that a corpse doesn't have moral value and me saying that it's wrong to fuck a corpse. That's clearly wrong.
That is the contradiction because when you say that it's wrong,
why it's not
you're saying that it's morally wrong because there's moral consideration on this corpse now.
No.
Let me ask you the question that I've been trying to ask you this whole time. Every single time I try to interject, you keep talking, man. Every single time I try to interject, you just keep stopping. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Just shut up. Okay. Listen,
I'm ready.
The question I have for you is there moral consideration? Is the moral consideration between a dead body and a sex doll any different? Being that they're neither
inherently, they have different instrumental value.
Neither are sentient.
Right. So they both have the same inherent moral value.
So no moral difference in consideration between a dead body and a sex doll. And certainly you would not object to somebody having sex with a sex doll, would you?
Sure. Okay.
Would you?
Can I just explain?
Would you? No, answer the question. Would you? You wouldn't. Okay,
no,
great.
I wouldn't.
Okay,
guys,
you said no.
This is incredible to me.
You couldn't object to somebody having sex with a dead body then. You couldn't because there's no moral consideration.
Okay.
That's where your inconsistency is.
I've already explained to you 5 times how I could. You haven't actually engaged with my explanation. It's not inconsistent, right? So it's really funny because before I feel like you realized your own confusion and then you tried to really quickly pivot to something else because you said something at the end of that sentence. You said you got it exactly right for the first time in this debate. Okay. You said that you phrased it perfectly. Something like the corpse doesn't have moral consideration, therefore it's wrong to fuck it, right? That's not true. It can be wrong.
No, I said the opposite of that. So you're not even listening.
No, this was your explanation of my position.
You're both talking past each other. You've given closing statements.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the Q&A. We
got to move into some more Q&A. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, guys. I have one more.
Really quick.
Go ahead.
Just give like a really quick analogy. Okay. So imagine if I threw a rock, right? If I threw a rock over a bridge, it fell off, it crashed through somebody's window and it killed them, right? And then I said, sure, I don't think the rock had moral consideration, but I think throwing the rock was morally wrong, right? And then Zen, because he can't like track what I'm saying, would say, that's inconsistent because you said that a rock doesn't have moral worth and yet it's wrong to throw the rock.
His final hypothetical is a straw man.
I'm just
nice straw man. Nice straw man.
It's not a straw man.
You're coping because you realize how inconsistent you are.
So you So you're not
Guys,
actually
it's
letting
not
me
gonna go
finish,
anywhere.
right?
Mouthy,
So
it's
the
really
point-
not going to go anywhere. It's not
so-
going to go
Yeah,
anywhere.
wait,
It's gonna
let's
go
finish
anywhere.
that.
Can I just finish this hypothetical? So
No,
I don't
you're
know what a
straw,
straw
you're
man
straw
means.
manning.
I don't-
No, it's a
30
straw man.
seconds.
No, cut it off.
I don't think you
Q&A.
know what a
30
straw man
seconds. Give him
means.
30
So-
seconds.
Dude,
so-
and
30
we
seconds
got a
is
lot
3
for
minutes
you
to
too,
the-
man. We
it's
got a
30
lot for you too.
Cool.
So hit it, Mouthy. You got 30 seconds on the last of this.
Right.
Yep,
So I
this
throw
is
a
it.
rock, it hits a car, it kills somebody, right? And then I say, I don't think the rock had moral consideration. And then Zen says, oh, well, that's
Straw man.
inconsistent. So then Zen says, so that's inconsistent because
Straw
you don't
man.
think the rock has moral consideration, and so therefore it's wrong to throw the
Straw man.
rock.
Straw man.
Right? Sorry.
Wouldn't mute me.
Like,
I don't
just
even care.
shut the
Straw
fuck
man.
up, Jesus Christ! I'm
he's
trying to
scoping,
get through a
he's
sentence.
frustrated.
Come on,
So,
Jen.
straw man.
the point,
Don't be
the
like
reason that this is not a straw man, the point here, right, is that in this hypothetical, we have a situation where you have done an action to a thing that doesn't have moral consideration, and yet the action was still morally wrong because you did a thing to a being that didn't have moral consideration, but you doing that thing to them had broader consequences that did harm people that I thought had moral consideration. That's the thing that's why it's not
Okay,
inconsistent for the rock thing, and that's why it's not inconsistent to the
Okay, now here's the
necrophilia
final
thing.
question I have for you. Here's the final question I have for you. What is the broader harm on somebody who wants to do necrophilia and they do it to the person who's already dead where there's no moral consideration, which you have admitted multiple times? What is
That's right.
broader
Yes.
what is the broader harm to everybody else if this person wants to do it and nobody else is affected? What is the broader harm?
Yeah, I can list a few. So, and I gave these earlier.
you can't.
Okay, well, I can list a few, and I gave these earlier, and you didn't engage with them, right? So the first is that I think that things, as a utilitarian, I think that the way to maximize utility is to adopt certain heuristics and certain dispositions, because as Derek Parfit writes in Reasons and Persons, direct act consequentialism is indirectly self-defeating. So in order to maximize utility, you have to adopt certain heuristics and dispositions, which often conflict with act consequentialism, right? And so adopting a disposition and a heuristic, which compels you to avoid raping dead bodies, is how you can maximize utility. There's also considerations about how if this news comes out, people might start to get anxious. If this behavior was socially normalized, then people wouldn't have the comfort of knowing that they get to choose what happens with their bodies after they die, which causes a lot of disutility. I explained all of this before, right? And you just...
Yeah, and everybody's eyes glaze over because nobody has any idea what the fuck you just said. A bunch of dispositional, propositional,
unclear?
heuristical,
That's it.
consequentialism.
Here we go.
Can I appeal to the moderators?
We
Can
I appeal to the
Gotta
moderators?
get the rest of this.
We're going to
Wait,
Q&A.
did you
We're
guys-
going to Q&A.
Really quick,
We're going to
Q&A.
Q&A.
No,
No,
question for the mod.
here it is. It's over.
It's all. Everyone's muted.
We're going to
We're going
Q&A.
Q&A. We have to.
We
Or
have
else
to.
We just won't get through it. So
Okay.
unmute
So
them
first
both.
question.
Unmute them both.
Okay. First question. And let me just unmuzzle everybody.
Yeah, sorry.
You
about
guys
that.
are definitely both
All good.
welcome back. This was
Of
sporty.
course.
Does Mouthy accept the mirror test for sentience, and does he recognize that some humans achieve sentience at 7 years of age? Whoa.
No. I reject both of those claims.
Awesome. Simple no. Love it. Zen, you want to chime in on that?
That's a first. No, that's all I got to say. That's a first. No, you just answer a question. That's all. That's
All
I
right.
wanted.
Move down.
Next one. Should we discriminate against the non-sentient even though one is currently the president of the United States? I guess that's to both people.
Not by killing them, but
Yeah, no.
by not voting them in. Yeah, probably.
I just don't think they're. Well, never mind. Let's keep it moving. Does Mouthy have an abortion policy post sentience?
No, I don't have a strong opinion on how we should legislate abortion post sentience. Because there's a variety of other factors that you have to take into consideration. There are like stem cells. There's like economic concerns. There's like concerns with respect to crime rates. There's like, there's a lot of ways in which the allowance or disallowance of abortion would have impacts on the instrumental value to the lives of, people who are already born that you'd have to take into account. I'm kind of agnostic in terms of the overall impact of that.
All right. What's one positive thing that each debater can say to each other? Oh, that's a nice one. That'll clear some of the blood up.
You look like my skeleton.
Oh my gosh.
You could
Hey, I'm a good guy.
you could play professional dodgeball with how good you are at dodging any hypothetical that you're uncomfortable with. So I think you're very talented at that.
I think I'll take the dub on that one.
Was that hard, guys? Oh wait, those are insults. Never mind. Moving on. Okay. For Zen, would unmoving gargoyles who could feel pain have relevance?
Next.
Yeah, this is dumb. I don't know what that was for. Okay. If one human doesn't have a right, then none do. True or false?
Like the human right to life? I would
Yeah.
say yes. I would say it needs to be absolute, universal, and inalienable, or else it doesn't exist. So,
Mouthy?
Okay.
I mean, I think that's like straightforwardly wrong. Obviously, you could stake out a position where you believe some humans have rights and others don't. There's no contradiction entailed by that.
Gotcha. And then for Mouthy, why do we need to travel to hypotheticals? Okay, we're not going back there.
Well, I've already
We're
explained
done
the
here. No,
value
it's
of
okay, Mouthy. It's
hypotheticals.
okay.
Okay.
I get it.
Well,
We're not
so
going
actually, I'm going to expand on that just real quick
there. Okay.
with Mouthy. Mouthy, when you go into a debate, you do expect that the debaters are going to follow the rules of logic and that they're going to engage with arguments, right?
Sometimes falsely, as we've seen tonight, but yeah, I generally expect that, or I would at least hope for that. Yeah.
So one of the things, and I'm going to kind of call you out a little bit for this, Zen,
Sure.
is that not you, Mouthy. I'm actually calling Zen out on this. One of the critiques that I have is I did notice a lot when hypotheticals would come up that you didn't want to engage with. You would just say, "This is La La Land," and I don't.
Because it is.
While I understand that, I also understand there's formal rules of logic for debate, and this is an informal debate, but it was just an observation that I had. So I wanted to.
Well, I'll tell you.
that.
If anybody saw my debate with Devin like a week ago on I won't speak the devil's name. But for the record, I give no fucks about any of that drama. So please, anybody who's watching, don't hold me to anything.
Yeah.
We're chill.
But basically, he was trying to present a similar hypothetical where like God would come down and say like molest this child or else I'm going to eviscerate the planet. I did the same thing. I rejected the premise. I cited Malachi 3:6, which I know Pedro really liked. I saw his reaction to that. But what he did, because I think he was a little bit more good faith than Mouthy is here, he changed the hypothetical. He said, instead of God coming down and telling you to do this, he said, and it seems kind of fantasy, but theoretically it could be possible. It theoretically could happen in the realm of possibility where Elon Musk creates some super weapon and says, hey, Zen, rape this child or I'm going to eviscerate the planet with my super weapon, or at least eviscerate a large population of people with like a nuke or something, which is a realistic hypothetical. And you know what? I engaged in it and I broke it down. And I engaged in the hypothetical. I had no problem doing it because it wasn't fantasy La La Land. That's all you got to do is
quick question. So you said that the reason you engaged with that one but not mine is because that one was possible, right?
Yeah.
Presumably, in order for something to be impossible, it has to entail a logical contradiction. So can you explain to me what the contradiction is that's entailed by anything?
I already did.
You've not.
Well, this was actually hard for me to get to, Zen, but there are things that are logically true that can't actually ever happen in reality.
Sure.
This is the way that the rules of logic work. It was
right, but this is the thing.
Particularly frustrating for me when it came to many different topics. But that's the only critique I had. I'm not.
Well, this is the thing about logic is logic is not just brute. Logic doesn't just exist. Logic is grounded in the absolute standard that maintains logic to be logical, right? And God is that standard. And look at Pedro. Pedro's like, yes. Can
I chime in, Zen? Can I chime in? This is the thing. Yeah. We and this is why we are, me and you, Zen, are trying to be consistent all the way through. And what are we confronted with? We're confronted with people who want to toe the line. They want to kind of hook and jive. So they make up the fantasy land, which I have to. I'm sorry, Mouthy. It's kind of a there is no Superman.
I'm not okay.
Superman does not exist.
I didn't claim that there was Superman, right? My claim, right?
Hypothetical.
But why would we? I'm just telling you the frustration of the Christian mind here. When we already have reality playing out, God has already made his first step from eternity past. That's what we mean by immutable, meaning he's not going to change. It's straight consistent. We're here now. We're here. There's no unicorn. There's no Spider-Man. There's none of that. So we like to talk about what things that are real. So it's kind of hard when we get confronted with the hypothetical that leads us into an hour conversation when we never touch back in reality. Okay. And now we're talking about crazy stuff that just doesn't exist.
So the problem is, you could say that it doesn't exist, right? It's not logically possible for exist. It's not even like nomologically possible, if you want to go with that modality, right? There is no like modality according to which any of the hypotheticals that I've posed couldn't obtain in reality, right? Now you can say it's very unlikely that they will obtain, or they don't obtain as far as we know in the world that we currently live in, right? But the point of these hypotheticals is just to show that you've staked out a moral position. If a moral position has conclusions that conflict with our moral intuition, that undermines the status of the moral position, right? And so whether or not it's unlikely, or whether or not it obtains in the reality we currently live in, is just completely immaterial to what I'm saying, which is just that your moral position has conclusions that are counterintuitive in realities that could absolutely exist.
And,
right?
And me and my co-host on this, we deviate a bit. Pedro's philosophies and mine are totally different when it comes to how we argue, how we do a lot of different things. I tend to follow a more structured, logical form of argumentation, but I do understand within the ethical system. This was just something that I wanted to bring up. Do you have more audience questions there, Pedro?
No. We blasted through them, and yeah, okay. And where I'm grounded is in presuppositional apologetics. So that's where I can just fully understand Zen, and I just see epistemology wise, where does logic come from? God. Okay, cool. That's where we're setting out from. But I do agree, Mouthy. This is what I would say, Zen, for advice for. I would have to do this too in order to get past the screaming and the ad hom match. We should do this. We should eat it and do this. All right, granted. All right, done.
Ask him again, real quick, Mike. I didn't see him. Neither one of us must have seen him.
Yeah, I didn't catch it. I wrote him down.
We've still got a couple of minutes, but we've been kind of saving them as we go. We had a lot of them flow through. So if you have one, go ahead and get it in while we got these guys here.
While he's typing that, though,
he said, Mouthy, I would like to know, do you believe in subjective or objective morals? I already know the answer to this, but
yeah, I think it's obvious.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are. I think I generally like lean towards the anti-realist position. I think there are like pretty decent arguments. Like I said, I'm reading Derek Parfit right now. He has some interesting arguments for the realist position. But I mean, I don't take like a hard stance on it.
Okay. And then we have at the Crucible, the morgue catches fire. Would you save the morgue staff or wheel the caskets out? Question for Zen. On corpses get moral consideration.
Well, I'm going to save the morgue staff from dying. I think that's pretty simple. But I mean, just to address it, like,
they're both human.
There's still a more, I was going to address it before you even said that more or corpses still are in my book, they're still granted moral consideration in that you shouldn't defile them. You shouldn't have sex with a corpse. You shouldn't eat a corpse. You shouldn't do bad things to a corpse that you would do to an already living person. But the life of the person is gonna take precedence over the corpse in the sense of saving the life, because the corpse's life is already gone. So
can I just say earlier you said that a fetus has moral consideration and virtue of it being a life, right? It is
a human life.
Yeah, it is being an alive human is, on your view, what gives moral consideration, right? Now, fetuses are not alive. You know that, right?
Yeah. Say that to every single reputable scientific source.
Wait, that fetuses aren't alive?
Yeah, you don't think fetuses are alive?
Wait, sorry. Shit, fuck. I meant corpses. Sorry.
Yeah, I got
corpses aren't alive, right? So if fetuses only have moral
You're
value and virtue, if fetuses only have moral value in virtue of being alive, right? Why would a corpse is not alive? Why, like, I thought that was your criteria. How is that going to apply to a corpse?
The corpse would still maintain moral consideration because
it's not alive.
Again, if you just let me finish, because it was created, the man itself was created in the image of God, who is the standard of morality, and he tells you also not to defile a corpse and not to eat it.
Okay, so just a completely new argument. Okay, gotcha.
No, it's literally the same argument because it's all grounded in the same thing, unlike your position. Your position is all arbitrary.
I mean, if you just want to appeal to like God, I mean, I just consider that to be a huge cop-out, right? I mean, we can have a...
No, it's not. It's literally the only way to ground any argument.
We can have a follow-up... I mean, that's not true, right?
No, it is true. What does true mean?
How is it true?
You don't even know what true means.
Wait.
So hang on, guys. We got to keep on. We got to keep on moving. I'm sorry. Crucible question: if everyone has their own moral system, then do you recognize that might makes right? That the strong do as they please, and the weak suffer what they must.
That is.
Mouthy, I'll let you feel that first.
Sorry, you say me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's trivially not going to follow. You can have a subjective moral standard on which might doesn't make right.
No, but the question is, if everybody just gets to create their own morals, isn't it just whoever imposes their morals and is strongest is the one who wins? So conquest.
They're the ones who gets to have their morals imposed. Yeah. Okay,
so then might makes right?
No, because right is not a synonym for who gets to have their morals imposed.
It's a figure of speech. Might makes right. It doesn't mean precisely right as in morally right, but it means like might wins. The strongest person wins.
That's trivially the case. That the strongest person.
Okay, and that's what your position entails. So there can be
position entails that
Adolf
too.
Hitler wins. Adolf Hitler wins because he's got the biggest army.
Okay, no.
Sorry, that's your position.
Your position. Okay, wait, sir. How does being a moral realist get you out of the conclusion that if someone had a bigger army, they wouldn't win a war?
I understand that, but it's the question of what is actually right and what wins.
Great. So you were using right as a synonym for winning, and I'm saying I reject that.
What wins morally is the one who just has the biggest guns. That's what your position entails.
No, it's not. It is not what my position entails. I just explained how. What you're doing is you're conflating the term right as in morally right with right as in who wins, right? I see no reason to accept that those two things are synonymous, right? Why would somebody winning a war entail that a subjectivist has to believe that their moral framework is right?
But because that's the only way that morals could be established is by who has the biggest guns.
No, wait, what? Yeah. How would somebody having bigger? Okay, so imagine.
There's no other way to establish morals. There's no other way to do it.
Let's imagine. Let's imagine that atheist. Okay. When you say establish morals, you're not talking about establish the truth of a moral system. You're talking about ability to enforce that moral system.
Correct.
But
yes.
But
that's the problem with subjective morality.
Right. No, because even if morality is even if morality is objective, the person who wins a war will still be able to enforce their morality, right? Even if we said that according to some objective law, Hitler's morality is wrong, it would still be the case that if you're using right as a synonym for who gets to enforce their system, Hitler would be right. Right. The reason that sounds absurd is because you're making this conflation between right and who gets to enforce their system, and it's just a stupid conflation.
How else do you establish morals?
There's a variety of ways you could establish morals. Wait, sorry, do you mean like on a subjective?
I don't want to hear it. I don't even want to hear it.
Sorry,
we got it.
I mean, how else would you establish morals?
I don't even care. This is a challenge dropped. This is a challenge dropped from Omni. He's asking if you would debate him on the objective morality without God.
No, Omni, I think you would be better off stuffed in a locker. And and no, you can't have moral. You can't have objective morality without God because there would be nothing grounding it.
Why?
Because there would be nothing grounding it.
Why not?
Because there would be nothing grounding it.
Why not?
He just answered.
No, that's not. No. I'm asking why couldn't there be anything to ground morality?
Because without God as an absolute regulating force of the universe that would ground things to be objective, everything is subjective. So objectivity as a whole cannot exist without God.
There could be moral truths that are just necessary and not grounded by God. What's incoherent about that position?
Because it would be subjective.
No, it wouldn't, right? I mean, the most moral philosophers are atheists and realists, right?
Okay,
there's no tension. There's no tension between these two positions, right? You can say that God doesn't exist and that objective morality is grounded in external irreducibly normative reasons. This is like the position that someone like Derek Parfit wants to take,
Okay,
right?
great.
And those reasons are binding no matter what your desires are, but they're not grounded in God. And they might just be necessary. What's incoherent about that position?
Well,
Sorry,
I got to ask you a question real quick.
Sure.
Where did you get the idea that most moral philosophers are atheistic?
Wait, most moral philosophers, I don't know. Most philosophers are non-religious, though.
Okay, but you said that's the only thing I took issue with.
Sorry, I missed.
I don't think that's true.
Sure.
I mean, either way, it doesn't matter. It would just be an outright appeal to majority, which doesn't necessarily mean you win. So,
but you haven't told me what the contradiction is, right? If
I
say God doesn't exist,
I'm done humoring this.
Yeah, we'll keep on moving. Cruz, does Zen think the Bible says God grants human rights? If so, where?
I don't know if it says it outright in the Bible. Maybe Pedro would know better than I do. But I do know that
I got it right here. Can I just read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, so if there is any encouragement in Christ, any comfort from love and participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy, complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord of one mind. Do nothing from self-ambition or conceit, but in humility. Count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but to the interests of others. Have this mind among you. And I won't go for the rest, but that's pretty much explicitly making the case for, law right there.
And then like without I don't know the Bible that well, but even just with the presuppositional apologetics that we both engage in, it's that God we have the presupposition that God is the standard and grantor of all things. So if rights do exist, then God must be the grantor of them. Like
wait,
even without.
So can I just ask like a really quick? I just want like a really like a short answer. So I guess this is for Zen, but Pedro can answer too, I guess. So his position is that it's not possible to ground something like moral truth or epistemic truth without God, right?
Or truth.
What if I say, okay, sure. What if I say there are moral truths, there are epistemic truths, and those truths are just necessary and they're irreducibly normative? What's the contradiction?
Wait, what do you mean irreducibly normative? How did you determine that?
I don't know what you mean. I don't know what you mean by how did I determine it? It just means that
how would you determine
there are external normative reasons that we have to act in certain ways that are just fundamental in the same way that something like numbers are fundamental, that we can just access through rationality, but there's no deeper account. There's no physics. There's no physical account of it or anything like that. These things are just irreducibly normative.
Would it be eternal? Would it be eternal? Because it would have to be ultimate. It would have to be ultimate and eternal.
So do you consider numbers to be eternal?
That's not. No, don't ask my question. No, don't answer my question with a question like a woman.
So
tell me.
Well,
I'm trying to understand.
Let me help.
So I can help you out. The purpose of me asking that question was because I want to know what you mean by eternal, right?
Eternal meaning no beginning, no end. Always was.
Okay. Then, I guess, sure. I just it's hard for me to conceptualize this. Like if you were to ask me, are numbers eternal? I just don't know how to make sense of that question.
And then so then in order for something to be eternal, you understand that would necessarily contradict the law of causality. So you couldn't believe in both.
No.
Okay. So
what's the law of causality? No.
It's just the law, the idea that things cause things. Hang on. The law of causality states that there's a causal relationship between all things that can be linked back to an ultimate first cause of all things. But
right.
if you're proposing something other than God that is eternal, you would find yourself in an infinite regress where causality could not exist.
No, so
there would need to be a third cause.
The funny thing is, like, if somebody's actually familiar with like the theological arguments, you're just like butchering them so bad. Like, okay, so when you say that the causal principle means that the universe can't be eternal, I mean, or that these normative reasons couldn't be eternal, I mean, that's wrong. I mean, the causal principle just says that whatever begins to exist has a cause. Now, theologists often combine the causal principle with the second premise of a cosmological argument, which states that the universe began to exist. So you would say whatever begins to exist has a cause, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. But the causal principle itself doesn't establish that nothing can be eternal.
No, it actually does. It actually does.
That's where the epistemology.
Doesn't.
I don't want to dogpile actually, but
yeah,
there's an epistemology to it.
Let's move on to the next question here. If morals are subjective, can you provide an argument of rape being morally correct? I don't think I think some of what happens here is that utilitarianism isn't that well understood. I don't think that many people actually study it. I've taken the time to really dive into it. It's not subjective, okay? It's not the utilitarian mindset is not subjective. I can tell you right now that Mouthy's going to give you 100 arguments for why it's morally not correct. The same way that Zen would. It is an ethical system. I just don't agree with the ethical system. So one of the things that people should probably do is dive into it, because it is a viable ethics system. It's just, in my opinion, a terrible one. But go ahead if you guys want to field that question.
Oh, I don't believe in subjective morality.
No, we're out.
Yeah. Does Mouthy agree with Singer's position on putting down infants who suffer immensely?
Yeah, I mean, if there's like an infant, so the thing is, we already have this practice where if there's an infant who has like a severe disability and that infant is going to lead like a horrible life, be a huge burden on its parents, generally what the doctors will do is they'll say, hey, we're keeping this infant alive with a respirator, but we will give you, the parents, the option to withdraw the respirator so that the fetus then dies. All Peter Singer really did, to my knowledge, was say, like, look, if you withdraw the respirator, that's going to be more painful as opposed to if you just euthanized it. So just euthanize it instead. And so Peter Singer thinks that it is a defensible position for parents to be given the option to have an infant be put down if it has some severe disability like that. I think it's a pretty defensible position.
Do you have anything on that, Zen?
I do not agree with killing infants.
Okay.
Christian, bro.
This is the last one, guys.
Just toss those to the fire.
Yeah, this is the last one.
Wait, can I ask a question to Zen? I have a question sent by someone. Someone wants to know: is it negligent manslaughter to have sex during the implantation period of a woman's menstrual cycle?
What?
So, if the right to life begins at conception, is it negligent manslaughter to have sex during the implantation period of a woman's menstrual cycle?
You mean
so?
Like,
because there's evidence that it reduces the chance of implantation of a zygote and thus increases chance of miscarriage.
I'm genuinely unsure. Like, so you're telling me that you could get a girl pregnant, have sex with her again, and then kill your baby?
Well, no. What I'm saying is that, so if a woman has sex during a certain period of her menstrual cycle, there's evidence that having sex during that period reduces the chance of implantation of a zygote and thus increases the chance of a miscarriage, right? And so at that stage, that would be a fetus who, or that would be after conception, right? Not a fetus necessarily. But so would you think that that is negligent manslaughter for the woman to have sex during that period of her menstrual cycle?
Negligent manslaughter, dude. I don't fucking know. I'm having trouble even like grasping this concept. Is that even like a thing? Like,
well,
the menstrual cycle?
I hear what he's saying, but I'm having a hard time grasping it too. So
you're asking if negligent manslaughter is a thing?
No, like somehow like killing your baby because you have sex with your partner again.
No, it's so if you have sex, if a woman has sex during a certain period of her menstrual cycle, there's evidence that doing so reduces the chance of the implantation of a zygote, which increases the chance of a miscarriage.
Oh, no. Okay, I understand now. Okay, so you're saying like if you have sex and get a girl pregnant at a time where she's less likely than optimal to have a successful pregnancy and instead miscarry. That's what it's asking. No, that is not intentional manslaughter. You're attempting to create a life. You can't control the biology down to a T. So no, you're not. No, I thought you were proposing something where it's like, you know, like a woman, like you get a girl pregnant and then you have sex with her again after she's already pregnant, and then like that kills the baby or something like. But no, what you're proposing, no, that's not intentional manslaughter. No.
Okay. So, well, the question is just that.
I want this question to be asked. I want that question from Ozzy.
Yeah, to Mouthy. Why isn't potential to have sentience good enough for moral consideration? why does it also have to have previously had sentience?
Yeah. So firstly to answer that question is because if you say that a being that's never had sentience and doesn't have current sentience has moral value in virtue of it having merely potential sentience, firstly, I just don't see any reason why I would accept that you have the rights of a person because you're a potential person, right? Like, we don't say that, like, picking out an acorn or like preventing a tree from existing is like the same thing as chopping down a tree, right? We generally recognize a distinction between a potential thing and the rights that that thing is itself granted. And also we would just run into really weird conclusions. Like, you would have to say that it's wrong for a woman not to have sex whenever she's fertile, or that's wrong to use contraception, etc., because you're preventing, we would basically say that everyone's morally obligated to be like baby making machines.
That's not true, right? Omni's not texting you, is he?
Is Omni texting me? Hold on.
That last question.
Yeah,
definitely.
Omni actually did text me, said, could you ask why Zen won't debate me if he's correct in his view?
God. Go ahead, Zen.
I answered it already, because you're better off stuffed in a locker.
So, okay, also really quickly, so Zen,
I would prefer to
so
just
the
give you a
question,
Charlie.
so the question that so the question that the person wanted me to ask you, so they said that the interpretation of the question was wrong. So under what they're talking about, the conception has already happened. So conception has already occurred, but having sex during that period of the woman's menstrual cycle increases the risk of the zygote failing to implant, and thus increases the risk that it will die.
This is like a super specific situation. Like, where lead us to the ultimate. Just take us to the ultimate. We grant everything. Say yes, yes, yes.
So
Where do
then
you
you
want
would
us to
say
go with
that
this?
a woman having sex in the wrong time during her menstrual cycle is negligent manslaughter.
That's what we would say.
I don't think you could actually like ground that legally, but like if we're just like conversing about that scenario, I'd probably say you probably shouldn't. That is true, for the record.
Well, is it manslaughter though?
But no, I'm saying like you probably should be cautious if you're aware that doing something after conception could result in a miscarriage. You should probably be cognizant of that.
Would you tell somebody that they should?
I don't know if you could actually argue that they should be jailed for it.
Well, that's a somewhat soft decision. But would you tell somebody that they should just be cautious not to commit manslaughter? Because if life starts at conception, then this would be like negligent manslaughter.
Yeah, you should be cautious. Yes.
Should you be cautious? Not would the lightest thing that you say to somebody would be like, hey, if you commit manslaughter, no biggie, but you should try not to do it.
No, I would not. I would say you should try not to do it, but no, manslaughter, no biggie. I wouldn't say that. I don't know where you got that from.
Well, would you say no biggie to what we're talking about?
No, I wouldn't say no biggie. I would say that if you are aware of something that could, result in like a miscarriage that increases the chances of a miscarriage or whatever, you should be cognizant of that and try to avoid that. I do think you should do that.
And that and manslaughter are equivalent.
But I don't know if you could actually argue manslaughter. If this, like, I'm not sure I actually could, and I'm not sure I actually would. What I would argue is not to abort it, which is the topic of debate here.
Gotcha, guys. We're going to shut this down now. This was a great debate. I really appreciated you having both you guys on. I know that these are longer debates. I know they're a little bit tougher. I think that topics like this, when people are this conflicted, really deserve to be fleshed out, even if we do spend 30, 40 minutes on a single point. I mean, if you think about how long we've been arguing about these issues for years, I wish that we would get a little more involved and have even longer debates. But, time is what time is. I hope you both had fun, and I hope that I see both of you back here. This is all Mouthy's fault. I'm blaming him.
Yeah.
Anything else you guys want to say on your way out the door?
Thank you for having me on, Mouthy. I'd love to say it was a pleasure, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
Come on, guys. It wasn't that bad.
Yeah, it was good.
I would say this. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go. I was just going to thank Mouthy for coming on. Thought you were a good sport. It was a hell of a debate.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me on. It was certainly something.
Yeah.
All right. See you later.
Go ahead, Pedro. You got anything to close with?
No, I was gonna tell Mouthy, hey, you pretty much, I think at a moment there did get dogpiled, but you held your own. You stayed calm. You didn't freak out like I see a lot of people do, and good job.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. It was very frustrating at times. Like, man, I don't know. I just sometimes like the refusal to engage with like hypotheticals just drives me crazy. But yeah, I think it was altogether is fun.
Yeah, that's a critique that I'll have. This might be the very first debate that I actually sit down and go over live, because that frustrates me too. And I might have Pedro join me just to go over it point by point, and me and him can argue, because I do think that if you engage in a debate, you do need to engage with a person's hypotheticals, and if they're stupid hypotheticals, it should be very easy to point that out. So
Right.
that's my take on that.
Yeah.
Mouthy, have yourself a great night, buddy.
Yeah, you too.
Right.
All right. Go ahead and sign us out, Pedro.
Hey guys, if you like this episode, please like, share, subscribe, share with your friends. If you want to help us out, there's links in the description. Donate. And yeah, I want to just lastly say I always like seeing Christians actually come out and be a part of the public square and make an impression. And Zen did that. I wish he would have stayed a little time. I would have gave him that high five right there. But yeah, we appreciate you. And we would hope if there's more of you out there, please come on. All right. Take it easy, guys.